This is a production of Cornell University.
Welcome everyone to the 2022 Campus Nature RX Symposium. We are so excited to have you. I am Stacey Parker with the UC Davis Arboretum and Public Garden, and my colleague Haven Kiers, it's her birthday today, and there are people, she's just outside this door, and she is getting people saying hi to her, not realizing that we're doing a symposium right now. So she's supposed to be with us. We're really excited to have you all here today. And very excited for the presentations from our presenters. We have so much that we're excited to learn about and share with one another. And so we're very excited. I see that Haven has gotten here. Happy birthday to Haven. And so we're going to keep our remarks pretty brief here because we know that the focus is really about getting people to the presentations themselves. We do ask that everybody keeps themselves on mute for the whole time unless you're presenting. We will be spotlighting the presenters. Feel free to have your camera off. We understand that, you probably don't want it on. Doesn't Haven, do you have anything you want to add?
No, just that we're really excited about doing this. We've been working hard on it, and we've got a great lineup of speakers, and it's just always so much fun to bring this group of people together because I think we're all doing really cool things, and I think this is just such a good opportunity to share what we're all doing and just let other people know the cool things that are going on. So thank you all for coming.
Yes, thank you so much. And in terms of the Campus Nature RX network, please feel free to visit our website, campusnature.com. You'll see all of the member organizations there. You can learn how you would become a member organization. You'll be able to join the newsletter there. Any information that you want to explore, learn about other people's programs, other institutions that have Campus Nature RX programs. So it's all there, but you can also reach out to particular people that have a leadership role in that. Dorothy Ebis and also Don Rakow. Dorothy, do you want to say a couple words?
Hi, thanks Stacey and Haven for all your hard work. Yes, so if you're interested in joining the network, membership is free. You can subscribe to the newsletter on the homepage, campusnature.com, if you go to the bottom of the homepage. If you are an institution that has an active Campus Nature program, if you fill out an application form, we can create a web page for you to put on the website as well. Add your institution information and contact details so that people can reach out to you directly if they come across your page on our website. So again, membership is free, and we have almost 50 or maybe more at this point institutions that are officially part of the network. So we'd love to have you join. If you have more questions, definitely check us out on campusnature.com. You can always email me, Dorothy Ebis or dcibes@wm.edu. I'm happy to put that in the chat if anybody's interested. So welcome everybody today, and thanks again, Stacey and Haven.
Thank you. And thanks so much to Dorothy and others who have put on this symposium before us because they created a very extensive roadmap for us to be able to do
that
this.
Was so helpful.
It was essential. And we may be asking some of you to do that in the future. So just know that it was made as easy as possible for us. And it was a real treat to actually be able to help out in putting this together. So I'm just going to advance a couple of housekeeping slides here. The first is the agenda for today. And as you can see, there are three main sections, and presenters have been given a total of 15 minutes for their sections. And we're going to do our best to keep everybody on time because we just want to make sure that we keep this to what we set out for it to be. And I think there'll be a couple of breaks, and at the end of each section, we'll have 10 minutes devoted to asking the presenters their questions. And for those of you who are presenting, please know that we'll send a 1-minute warning in the chat, plus when another message in the chat privately chat to you, letting you know that that your time is up. And then if you go over, I'm going to need to interrupt. So just be warned about that. Okay. And then this slide is to make it really easy for you to get to campusnature.com and to learn more about becoming a member institution and how to sign up for the newsletter and other resources. So
the QR code takes you right to sign up for the newsletter.
Yeah, thanks
we
to
want to hook
Haven.
you in.
Thanks to Haven on that one. Okay, so I think that we're pretty good. And oh, this was our welcome slide. So I can't see I don't have presenter view here. So I don't know what's up next. It's like a surprise to me. But this was for us to just introduce ourselves and this wonderful symposium this year. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Dawn Rakow and Heather Kulken for talking about the Nature RX Guide for college students.
Hi there, I'm Heather Kulken. I'm the founder and director of Families in Nature. I'm based in Austin, Texas, and I'm also the U.S. co-chair of Nature for All, which is a global movement to connect people to nature and name access to nature as a human right. And so I would like to introduce you to Families in Nature for a second. We work to inspire all families to fall in love with nature, all people to fall in love with nature, and to foster the next generation of conservationists. And we also work very hard to create equitable access to nature for all. So, and then my co-speaker in this section is Dr. Dawn Rakow, and he'll introduce himself further, but he is heading up the Nature RX program at Cornell. The goal of our presentation and also this guide that we've created is to help you see that nature is for everyone and everyone needs nature. It can be really challenging to get outside to play and spend time when you have busy schedules, or if you didn't grow up spending time in nature with your family or have a family that spent a lot of time outside. If you don't feel like you belong outside or in state and national parks, if you don't have a car at school to get to places where nature seems to be far away, or even if you've changed ecosystems, and it can be challenging to learn how to play in the snow, how to dress in the north, or how to be safe and still spend time outside in the heat of August in the southern states. And so Dr. Rakow and I wanted to create a really simple and approachable resource to help you see nature as something that is all around you, no matter where you are. It can even be in your dorm room and definitely on your college campus. And so with the huge amount of help from my program coordinator, Jordan Jolly, who is also on this call, she's monitoring the chat for you guys, we have created this Nature RX guide for college students. We want college students, we want to help you guys get more nature into your lives for better health, mental and physical health, for school success, and for happiness, to enjoy your life and enjoy your time at school. We've all had so much stress for the last couple of years with COVID. A lot of people have started college during COVID and online and in their parents' houses, like my own children did. And so it's difficult right now. And so the more time we can help you spend in nature, the healthier you'll be and the better your grades. We even put in some things about making friends outside. So we hope that this is a great resource for you guys to feel that you can get outside more often and have fun. So
and I'm going to take over from Heather there and walk you all through this guide. But before I do that, I want to preface my remarks by saying a couple of things. First, yes, many thanks to my colleague, Heather, and also to Jordan Jolly, who took the initial text that I developed and turned it into such a lively guide. Jordan has the benefit of being a relatively recent college graduate herself, so understands how to make this graphically appealing to today's 18 and 19-year-olds. We are going to put in the chat how to access this guide for free. But I will also mention that it can be used today, but it is also not cast in stone. So if you have suggestions for how it can be improved, Heather and Jordan and I are very open to that. Okay, next slide. So we start with a table of contents, but more importantly, we start by trying to convince first-year students why spending time in nature would be important to them, psychologically, physiologically, behaviorally, and socially. And hopefully by reading through this list of benefits of time in nature, young people will see that such activities, first of all, don't have to take a lot of their daily time, and secondly, can be of great, great benefit to them. Next. So we wanted to give freshmen a sense of how they can spend time outside while still attending to their studies and to their various other activities. You can make sure that you take a nature path when walking to class. You can eat your lunch or snacks outside. You can do your reading, coursework, or studying outside. And for so many of our campuses today, there are green spaces where they can study and read, and most of those spaces, especially when they are nearby buildings, have built-in Wi-Fi. Next. We talk about the fact that spending time in nature can save you money because you can skip the gym. You can also select courses that involve the outdoors. That's not only really obvious courses like biology, ecology, geology, environmental science, but often engineering courses, cultural studies, or even writing courses will have outdoor components. And you can also participate in sponsored events that your college or university are putting on. We do recognize that for many students, especially those coming from very urbanized areas, that spending time in nature could be a fairly new and perhaps even intimidating activity. So we suggest that individuals explore the clubs that their school has to offer. Outing clubs, hiking clubs, climbing, camping, environmental science, sustainability clubs, etc. And these clubs can both be a great way of engaging with nature and also forming a social group. Next. Also, we recognize that not all college students are in the same financial conditions, and that buying new outdoor gear can be quite expensive. So we have recommendations for obtaining secondhand gear, which often is in perfectly acceptable condition, or renting gear. And we also talk quite a bit about going with the seasons. If you are from Arizona and suddenly you're in the state of Maine, that can be quite a shock. And likewise, if you're from New York and now you're going to school in Utah, that can be equally disorienting. Next. So we talk about the right sort of activities for each season. In spring, get involved with planting, visit farmers markets, go on a spring hike, look for the swelling of buds and the first spring wildflowers. And in summer, find ways of going out onto the water and enjoying the joys of summer. Then in fall, next slide, you can enjoy the wonders and beauty of the changing season, pick produce, carve pumpkins, and in winter, there is so much to do for those of us who have a cold winter: sledding, snowball fights, and eating or drinking hot chocolate. Next slide. So we also talk about the groups that you can join or apps that you can utilize. Next. And getting involved with forest bathing, finding a special sit spot where you turn off your phone. Next. My time is up, so we also talk about dressing for the weather. And we encourage everyone to download this guide from the link that Heather has provided. And if you do have input about how the guide can be made even better, we invite you to contact one of us with that. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, we're gonna start our session 1. Thank you so much to Dawn and Heather for that wonderful guide, and for also the invitation to everyone to help make it better. So we're going to turn it over to Jennifer Roberts. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hope you all can hear me clearly. I'm actually doing this presentation from my hotel in Boston, and I will be leaving afterwards to go catch my flight. So I'm so happy that this is our 3rd symposium. Hopefully one day we will all be together outdoors doing this. But in any case, I was tasked with talking about a new course that I've created. It's a new course that I've actually started teaching this semester. So it's brand new, and I'm excited to get the feedback from students so that I can tweak it and, make it improvements for the next go around. The course is called Black Bodies, Green Spaces from 1619 till today. Next slide, please. And so this is the cover of the ELMS page for the course. And basically, it literally is what the title of the course sounds like. We go from mostly in a sequential order from the times when Black bodies were brought to what was to become the United States to current day. And next slide, please. And when we go through all of these phases, we actually examine basically how the formation of this country, along with systemic racism, really shaped the experience and the connections of green space with Black Americans. And so we go through a variety of topics that I will kind of give you a snapshot of momentarily, but literally everything from slavery in nature to all the way to current day of situations of like moving while Black. So a lot of the work that I do incorporates movement, meaning physical activity, recreational or active transport. And often those activities are done in green space or even blue spaces or many different natural environment spaces. Next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly talk about the main course assignments and give you kind of an idea of how I've created this course. And granted, I think of this as literally a living course, no pun intended, but because I'm looking for feedback from the students for things that, are working, not working, and need to be tweaked. Next slide. So one of the activities that I have the students do is a nature journal. So I gave them all a hardbound journal with their name affixed to it. And I told them, this is a journal that I want you to choose a space that you would go to twice a week for the whole semester, because I want them to see the change, the change of the season, just the change of the space on different times of the day and different days. And I want them to reflect in that space, and it could be anything. It could be anything from, writing a poem, a vignette, or an essay, or a drawing. I've seen some really wonderful drawings that some of the students have done. And I just kind of want them to be in that space and engage in that space. And even if they don't have a lot to write, just really soaking up and absorbing that. And I've had some students who say, I really wasn't a natural or a nature person, but now going to this space, I really look forward to it. Next slide. And so another assignment is a series of 3 papers. And with this assignment, I asked the students to really kind of interrogate the concept of wilderness and to look at the definition of wilderness in terms of how it's been defined through the lens of white people from the beginning of time. I want to then kind of critically examine the relationship of how that definition influence the relationship of Black Americans with wilderness, and then talk about, experiences of oppression or transgression within wilderness environments. And I want them to do this over 3 different historical periods. So the first paper is to do these questions and write this essay within the period of Black American enslavement. The second is post-Reconstruction. And then the third is modern times. Next slide, please. Another assignment is the environmental justice interviews that I want them to do. So in pairs, they are to go and, find an environmental justice expert or someone who is an environmental justice activist, just someone who works in that space, and to interview them and kind of ask them specifically, how do they define environmental racism? And what does it mean for environmental justice? What does that mean for people of African descent today? And then we also had an activity in class where students were allowed to, we discussed together what other questions would we want to ask, the interviews or interviewees. And so the students are now at the point where I think it's this week or next week that they're going to actually do the interview. And then they bring in the recording. Actually, they post the recording. I only really get to see it. But then they do a presentation. They talk about their experience in terms of how this actual, what they learned from this interview. Next slide, please. And then the final project is the outdoor Afro project. So this is the other part that I have to tweak because I kind of, when I was doing this, I kind of forgot these are like undergrads and they may not have a car. So asking them to go like maybe all the way to Shenandoah or all these places, and actually some outdoor Afro activities are kind of within the city, but still it can be arduous for a student who doesn't have a car and, they're on a fixed budget. So we've had to tweak this and kind of go to another amendment of this exercise where they would actually just go to a park. And what I really wanted them to go is to go to an outdoor Afro event and interview some of the people, if they were, to get permission, interview some of the attendees at the outdoor Afro and ask them, how did you get involved in outdoor Afro? Have you always been connected to nature? Why or why not? And like your most enjoyable aspects of nature, and then anything else, and then to take photos of the people involved, but also of the natural spaces. So we're kind of tweaking that a little bit. And so the students are probably going to go to a close park that's kind of actually a city bus ride away to do this activity. Next slide, please. So for these next series of slides, you can just literally advance to each slide, like literally every 5-10 seconds. And this is really just going to show you an example of some of the lectures I have given in terms of the whole framework of the class. So we can start advancing. So this is, we're going all the way from the beginning, from the slave trade. And then from here, we move forward and go on to, you can go to the next slide. And we talk about forms of expression while folks were enslaved. For example, how African-American use natural elements to dye their clothes. This is a great documentary that we've shown in terms of the Atkins Arboretum and how that played a role in the Underground Railroad with Harriet Tubman. So that's a great piece that we've also incorporated. Next slide. We then talk about the relationship of, nature with people who were not enslaved, but up north. So we talk about Seneca Village, and we talk about how these folks use nature as a way to kind of be removed from like the toxic environment, literally from the discriminatory toxic environment, but the physical toxic environment within Manhattan. Next slide. We then also talk about the relationship between Africans, enslaved Africans, and indigenous people. And this kind of then introduces us to the next slide, where we start to talk about land grants and expropriations of land and what that means in terms of, the tribal communities. And then also we talk about what does that mean in terms of, how do you atone for that? How do you recognize that, particularly if you're a land-grant university, an attendee of a land-grant university? Next slide, please. So this is another example of a video I showed talking about the tribal lands loss. Next slide. Then we move forward and we talk about, okay, now folks are free, technically, but not really, because they're still bound in terms of two aspects: the Black codes in terms of how their freedom was limited, in the sharecropping system. So they're still working on the land, but they're marginalized. They're in a state of perpetual servitude. Also, after this period of this Reconstruction, they're in this terrorized period of Jim Crow South. Next slide, please. And so we talk about what Jim Crow is, because a lot of these students, they didn't know the derivation of Jim Crow. I mean, they kind of sort of knew. They thought it had to do with, white water fountains and Black water fountains. So they had a little bit of it, but they didn't get the whole history of it. So we go through that. Next slide, please. We talk about how the slavery period, as well as the sharecropping, really exploited the land as well as the bodies, Black bodies, in terms of, the sharecropping economy, constantly, like how we went from tobacco to continent, but constantly, causing this ecological degradation to the soil, all in the purpose of making more money. We also talk about the boll weevil infestation. And that leads us to, okay, next slide. That leads us also to, talking about environmental thought leaders like just George Washington Carver, how he was very instrumental in helping rectify that boll weevil infestation, saying how, we have to change the crops. You can't continuously exploit the soil with the same type of crop. And so he introduced kind of like planting peanuts, particularly in that Cotton Belt region. Next slide, please. We also talk about Booker T. Washington, how he talked about how, yes, he was born an enslaved person and he became free, and he was instrumental in the founding and the operation of Tuskegee Institute, but he talked about using nature really for racial uplift. I even play this audio where he often gave lectures to the faculty and students every week at Tuskegee Institute. And this is an audio that I usually play for the students. It's narrated by someone else, but it's kind of quite powerful, particularly because it ends on that last line: nature draws no color line. Next slide, please. We also talk about the relationship of nature and the perspective of nature along W.E.B. Du Bois. Particularly, we talk about how he found the irony in terms of he found all this glorious physical nature, particularly when he went to the national parks. But in order to get there, he had to go in a Jim Crow car. So he talks a lot about that. And then that leads us to how he talked about, next slide, please, the Idlewood So that was kind of a self-segregated. It's really, I can't really say self-segregated. It was segregated by, by default, because you couldn't go to other resorts. But how this Idlewood in Michigan became kind of like this Black Eden, where Black folks could go and experience, the natural environment. And actually W.E.B. Du Bois, he had bought land there, but he never did, erect a house or anything. But he enjoyed going there. He thought it was just beautiful, like a Black Eden. Next story, next slide. So then we also talk about how, look, we had to get out of the Jim Crow South. We couldn't make money because we were in servitude, with the sharecropping, and it just was awful. And so we went up north, now to urban areas. Next slide, please. And so with this great migration, 6 million of African Americans went to these urban areas. And one of the most popular, along with Detroit and New York City, but was Chicago. And so you can see on this figure, you can see how initially in 1920, well, you can't really see from this, but initially in 1920, Black Americans only were about 5% of this tiny little swath of what is now known as the Chicago Black Belt. But by 1960, this whole area, including the area that says University of Chicago, was all completely African-American. But how they used that Washington Park, which they then subsequently named Booker T. Washington Park, as a space for retreat, because they needed a green space. Like, you got to think about it. These people went from working on farms, working outside, to now the day starts not with the sun rising, but with a time clock and industries and factories. And now they're like, oh, I need a dose of nature. Next slide, please. We talk about particularly, well, we do a little bit about talking about Richard Wrighton specifically, because he talked in Black Boy about his journey from Memphis to Chicago. Next slide. Particularly since, he had that phrase, the warmth of other suns, hence that was a title that was in a recent book recently, but that was a title he used for his Black Boy. But he talked about when he got to Chicago, there were no curves, there were no trees. And so he was like, what is this? He wanted to go for a new hope of life, but there was no trees. Next slide. Then we talk about sundown towns. Next slide. I know I'm running out of time, and I just, we can end here, but I'm just giving you a kind of a snapshot of all of the things we go through talking about lynching. We go next slide, we talk about strange fruit. We talk about all of these things about how lynching terrorized people in natural spaces, and how that was something that people have to kind of get themselves reacquainted with, because of the fact that, I heard about lynchings, or I saw lynchings in these natural spaces. So that's why I don't necessarily have a connection. And I can end here because I don't want to take anybody else's time, but this is just kind of giving you a snapshot of some of the classes that I go through.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Sure.
Wow. Very powerful. And all of these beautiful slides will be available. The recording of this symposium will be available to everyone. I think that we just have a little bit of post-processing, but we'll end up putting it up on our website when it's done. Yeah. So thank you so much.
No
okay.
problem.
Next up, we've got Everly Jazi. Okay.
Hi, thanks for that. I'm Everly Jazi, and I'll hold off on introducing myself because I'm about to tell you some of my story. And after this, I'll share how I started a campus RX program at my university and some strategies that might help some of you who are thinking about doing this as well. Next slide. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, where I first fell in love with the outdoors, biking with my dad along a rail trail behind my house, 3 miles to Dairy Queen often. And the trees and the grasses alongside the path were my nature. Now, next slide. Now, when I study nature and all of its meanings and all of the differences of what encompasses nature, I think about that bike trail and how one's access and perception of what nature is has many different forms depending on where you grew up, which region of the world you live in, the access to different flora and elements like mountains, bodies of water, and more. Next slide. And then when I went to university in Washington, D.C., I was exposed to a rich tree canopy of the wealthiest quadrant of the city and access to nearby public lands. And I learned about a hiking club, very similar to a campus nature arcs program at my school. I had not gone on many hikes prior, and it became evident that on my first hike with the club, the parks of the National Capital Region are really like true hiking trails, and I needed more experience. Next slide. Even though the entire group that I went with on my first hike had to abandon the hike solely because of my lack of proper shoes and my nervousness about ice on the trail, I was really hooked. I started going on other walks and hikes, and even became an outdoor ropes course facilitator at my university. Next slide. And then happen chance, I became president of an outdoor club at my university, the Jane Goodall Roots and Shoots Club. With that opportunity, I was able to take others hiking and also camping for the first time, and it felt good to show others the joys of spending time in natural areas. Next slide. For the same reason, I became a park ranger in Wyoming and Alaska just 1 year after camping for the first time in my life. And I also kept going with my own personal love for the outdoors. So I went on a backpacking trip, 1,300 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail. And I wanted to share my story, and I know we all have one, because it shows a perspective of the field that I don't often hear. I didn't grow up skiing in the winters and sitting by a lake in the summers, but I, like all of us that have been shown to, still prefer natural areas and the outdoors. And I have this innate preference for natural spaces, and my life has been changed because of my connection to nature. So it started from childhood, but it progressed with a campus nature program. And I wanted to share this story because I don't go to many conferences with other practitioners or those doing more applied work in the field, and I wanted to validate the work that all of you are doing as well. Next slide. My journey wasn't easy, but with these programs and the grace and patience of all of the more experienced hikers and people who showed up along the way, I was able to overcome barriers where I could have gotten lost or left out. And then when I started my master's on nature and health in Ohio State, I wanted to do more than just research. I wanted to make an applied difference, like the time when I was a park ranger and outdoor educator. I had heard of Nature RX and wanted to start a campus RX program at Ohio State. So I wanted to reach out to students, and especially students outside of my environmental focus department and students who have faced barriers and exclusion or constraints in outdoor recreation and in their personal experiences with natural space, maybe those who hold stigmas about or traumas around the outdoors. Next slide. So not knowing where to start, I emailed the president of my university with my plan, and then I was able to receive some response from the Office of Student Life, and I met with the representatives there to share my ideas and like possible tiers of involvement. And then after a few follow-up emails, I was able to meet with a whole wellness panel with Student Life, the counseling office, student health, and others to present my proposed program. And though everyone was on board, it was difficult to move forward just by myself without this program being on anyone's top priorities list and without the direct support or funding from the university. So in the end, I had to graduate from my program and leave things unfinished, and I never was able to hold a proper series or offering. So I wanted to share some strategies that I learned in my process. So hopefully anyone here who wants to start a campus nature RX program can overcome these barriers. And hopefully we can also start a dialogue in the chat of any ways that other individuals have overcome any hoops that they've encountered in creating their program. So I have 3 to share. Next slide. So the first is partnering with someone who is in charge of campus priorities and university resources. This was really helpful for me to meet with the Office of Student Life and to transcend just one grad student trying to create a project to a network of heads of offices. And it was also helpful to see who at the university was interested in form a working group. So students, professors, staff members, others in kinesiology, psychology, epidemiology, landscape architecture, sociology, environmental and natural resources might be a few that you seek out. And then once I formed a working group, although we never properly met, we were able to have like an online platform where we communicated together and we shared other resources that each other had, and then strategize. And then also importantly is considering equity and underrepresented groups. So research has shown that those of low socioeconomic status with education or income and perhaps other marginalized communities experience significant benefits in nature once actually recreating in the outdoors. So research from authors that are actually in attendance here have also shown that there are significant benefits for university students who have not already had intentional experiences with quality natural space for psychological or health purposes, and also reaching more than just a nature-focused student population, those who are already like in environmental studies or plugged into arboretums or campus farms should be a focus of all nature campus RX programs. So it is also necessary to think about actually like hiring or funding those who are skilled in creating inclusive outdoor spaces to form these programs in a manner that will reduce barriers to outdoor recreation and any like systemic, like discriminatory or institutional exclusionary practices, culture-based stigmas, and any concerns or like intrapersonal needs that individuals have, like the right gear, experience, like me when I had the hesitations of walking on icy trails with a drop into class 5 or 6 whitewater. So also like offering beginner offerings or touch points to build up to those trips as well. Next slide. So I'm really passionate about this just because I think just like access to higher education can facilitate some financial and social mobility, I think experiences and immersion in nature can also provide healing to those who might have disparities in their connections to less accessible natural spaces and outdoor education. Making outdoor spaces and around college campuses more available and equitable with a variety of programs like including walks, but also like sedentary and other kinds of activities for all abilities, and spreading awareness of the importance of nature connection and prioritizing within the bureaucracy of academia this program and the outdoors can just help students who, like me, can enjoy and heal with nature and perhaps rethink their entire life stories. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Everly. That was so inspiring. I think we're ready for our next speaker, Jesse Chang. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jesse Chang. I'm the Executive Director of Catalyst San Gabriel Valley, which is a nonprofit working in the county of LA, just east of the city of LA. And our primary mission is partnering with local school districts, helping underserved schools, families, and students. Our context is predominantly Asian, Latino families, many of them who are also recent immigrants. And our goal is always to not only see these families and communities and schools not survive, but also thrive. And so School Gardens has been one of the things that we've been doing over the years, and it's really a literal manifestation of the kind of thriving we want to see in our community. And I'm rather new to the whole nature RX piece. And I think part of that is because you don't talk about, at least when I was doing these gardens, I don't sell the gardens as a place for mental health, mental health and well-being, because in order to kind of get the stakeholders and administration on board, we have to talk about being an outdoor classroom. This is going to enhance the education, the science, maybe the writing. So we don't really talk about mental health as a way of creating these spaces. However, I did start becoming a lecturer for a food and environmental justice class at Cal State University, Los Angeles. And so it's been interesting where I can actually assign Nature RX as part of the curriculum. And I've had students, respond positively to that as well. But at the K through 12 level, that's not something I can necessarily dictate as a nonprofit partnering with local schools. But to just kind of, next slide, just to give some context as to sort of the motivation, this is a Google Map picture from 2019 of my childhood home in Massachusetts. And it looks pretty much the same. They still kept the sugar maples in the front. This is triggering me because I remember I had to rake all those leaves up every fall. But if you look in the back, there's also very much, there still is remaining woods in the back. And there was even more when I was growing up because they didn't have as many of the sort of these suburban houses kind of, eating away at all the forest. And I remember have very rich memories every year looking for wild blueberries in the patch of grass where, the grass wasn't able to grow, searching for salamanders underneath logs, every spring looking for the vernal stream or wetland that would appear with the snow melt or with the rains, and seeing the emergence of skunk cabbage and looking for pink lady slipper orchids every spring, creating a little fort out of logs. And so all of these things were such I never realized the gift of that amount of exposure to nature, and I wasn't supervised either. Now that was the other thing. But that kind of rich experience, I think you can go to the next slide, is what I feel, especially here in urban Los Angeles, is what I would want to pass on to my kids who are growing up here in LA. And what I would like to see, especially our underserved schools, to be exposed to as well. I'm gonna give you a second just to read this quote from David Sobel, who's a place-based educator and teacher about place-based environmental education. Give you 5 seconds to read that. And the context of this quote is, and my daughter has confirmed this, that environmental education when she was in elementary school basically was teaching them about global warming and all the terrible things that are happening to our planet. And David Sobel is saying when we start with that, that can actually create a subtle form of dissociation for children, especially if they haven't had a lot of positive experiences with nature. Then what they're learning about nature is that it's all going, badly, and therefore it's also overwhelming, and therefore it's sort of like, well, we need to kind of leave it behind, and there's nothing I can do about it. And so I really like how David Sobel says, no, the first step we want to do is to create a sense of love. Can we talk about love? Learning to love it and feel comfortable in nature. And I think that's kind of my primary motivation, is to create these spaces on these campuses where a lot of students don't get that kind of exposure. I remember one of the superintendents, when we were talking about one of the projects, saying, yeah, I want my kids, I want our students to have that same kind of access to the kinds of green space that you often have to pay for or have memberships to get into, like the local arboretums or other gardens in LA. And so I think that's one of those things. Yeah, we want to create access with these gardens. But more importantly, not just create the access, but also create a sense of bonding and create a sense of connection to nature for students who are not necessarily exposed to a lot of it, especially in our context in LA. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about two of the gardens. One of them is a high school edible native garden here in, those are two of my interns. And you can go to the next slide. And the other one's middle school, nature garden. This one's primarily natives. And then next slide. And as I was reflecting on this talk, I was like, well, what made some of this unplanned nature RX that teachers implemented? What made that successful? And part of it was the geography of where we placed these gardens. And as you can see from these kind of Google Maps, the red is where the gardens are located in terms of where the campus are. And you can see that they're in central locations. They're not marginalized, like put off to, I remember walking through some sites and they really want, the principal or they want to put it way in the back, like in the back corner, out of sight, out of mind. But I think that kind of would end up not being utilized because people aren't going to see it. And only those who have that kind of special knowledge or have particular passion for it will maintain it. And so these central locations on campus gave that sort of access. And you can see the blue lines are where the students and school community, parents, they would all be walking through those different areas. The one on the right-hand side in particular, the nature garden, there were 4 or 5 doors that actually open up on each side of each of those 2 wings. And so those doors actually open out into the garden and students and teachers can actually walk through there. And then the T is where the sort of my champion teachers who really cared for the garden and integrated the garden into their classroom. You can see where they're also centrally located. And so they have immediate access to the garden. Okay, next slide. And so here's a quote from the high school teacher, English teacher. I'll just give you a second to read what she had to say. And it was funny because, again, this was unplanned. This is just ways that she started incorporating the garden into her classrooms. And she said for herself that personally, I'd always go outside to decompress, get away from technology. She had a lot of computers set up in her classroom that was adjoining to the garden. Get away from technology and sit in the garden to feel better. It was also a reminder for me to get out more. Now she's no longer at that school, no longer having access to that garden, and she notices that she's a lot more stressed at her new location. Okay, next slide. This is the junior high science teacher. I'll give you a second to read what he had to say. and I've been in and walked in like during his classes, and I can attest that that classroom environment can be very stressful for at times, classroom full of junior high kids, but yet he was able to utilize the garden for students to be able to de-stress. He noticed they were happier when they were working outside, and yeah, so that's one of those. So even though this was unplanned, I was really happy to hear about how nature and these gardens were being utilized to address things like mental health and help students. And I'm hoping that when I started the lecturing for the food environmental justice class, I started online. It was completely online because we were still coming out of the pandemic. But I think now, maybe that's part of the silver lining. I'm hoping that Nature RX will continue to not just happen in these gardens, but as I'm building more gardens, and I'm looking to do the same at Cal State LA, that in our post-pandemic world, that Nature RX is just going to become another way of intentionally selling more school gardens in our underserved communities and LA's urban concrete sprawl. So thank you for your time.
That was so lovely. I mean, wow. I'm just so excited about all of these presentations. Thank you so much, Jessie. That was wonderful. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the next group here. We've got Tara, Sabo-Attwood, Nina, Stoyan-Rosenzweig. I'm sorry if I'm. Maybe you want to introduce yourself and then also your students. Thank you.
So hello, everybody. My name is Nina Stoyan-Rosenzweig, and I will be kind of overseeing, I'm not doing the actual presenting, the first session from a two-part talk by folks from the University of Florida. So Dr. Sabo-Attwood will be presenting in session 2, and 3 first-year medical students, Anjalika, Chalamgari, Akanksha, Dave, and Annika will be presenting the first talk that is part of a project that has been developed with the assistance of a fellowship from the Harvard Macy Institute. So it looks like, and with that, I will turn it over to Anjalika.
Okay, hi everyone. So again, as Dr. Nina mentioned, my name is Anjalika. I'm a first year medical student here at UF. Sorry, okay. I think my other colleagues are here as well, but just to kind of start us off. So again, as Dr. Nina mentioned, in this presentation, we're kind of going to be exploring kind of the ideas of university art museums as healing natural spaces. And specifically, we're going to be kind of discussing a program that was created with this in mind. And so before I kind of delve into those ideas, I should first mention that this program was developed with the help of the Art Museum-based Health Professions Fellowship with the Harvard Macy Institute. So there's that. And just so what is this program? So essentially, what this program is it works to kind of use contact with art, especially kind of the metaphorical nature that one can experience through art, to assist students, medical students, health professional students, and eventually patients with becoming kind of familiar with and comfortable with being in nature. And so in conjunction with the University of Florida's Samuel P. Harn Museum of Art, which is kind of depicted here, this project explores art museums and art as kind of like these neutral spaces for exploring sort of people's comfort, safety, and preference for further interaction with nature and other spaces. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, and so, again, as I mentioned, this project recognizes kind of nature as sort of this broad healing modality. And so I want to note particularly that within this project, we define nature very broadly. So we include, even small nature. So, like snails to larger organisms like, the hawk here, to even, habitats and possibly kind of wilderness areas. So nature is very broad with how we're defining it here. Okay, so this idea of nature prescription programs, as kind of learned through all of these other presentations as well, is not new. For example, as I've listed kind of here, there are websites such as ParkRx where patients can kind of retrieve information about their local parks. There are programs like Walk with the Dog where physicians may lead kind of group walks with their patients and therefore kind of create a safe environment for their patients who might be uncomfortable in nature or fearful of nature. There has also been rheumatologists, for example, also write prescriptions for their patients to repot plants, which can be especially beneficial to patients that have arthritis or patients that might want to maintain kind of their motor skills. So that's a useful way of engaging in nature and also engaging in kind of that physical activity as well. Here at the University of Florida, we also have a horticultural therapy program where essentially patients with specific medical diagnoses can benefit from things like gardening or specific outdoor activities. And groups in general have also created kind of like these medical prescription pads where physicians or other healthcare professionals can prescribe different nature activities. Next slide.
Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Akanksha Dave. I'm also a first year medical student. So kind of going off of what Anjalika was saying about nature prescription, here on this slide, you can see that we've provided kind of from the Shetland Islands, a program that shows part of a nature prescription. And so I don't know if you can, read the specific things on this slide, but essentially there are annual calendars that offer a choice of outdoor activities in specific areas. So things like, it's November right now, so things like, according to the calendar, going otter watching or talking to a pony, kinds of things like this could help patients be more in tune to what is available to them locally and help make interacting with nature more accessible for them. Next slide. Okay, so this is an example of a calendar that offers seasonal outdoor activities in the Gainesville area, which is where we're located in the University of Florida. And so as, healthcare provider, talking through such a calendar with some of these activities can also help someone prescribe nature activities to their patient. And it can also, with the variety of activities, help the patient determine what kinds would be most beneficial or intriguing for them. So activities such as walking, something as simple as that, or even more interesting such as birding or shell collecting, geocaching, kind of can help appeal to a wide variety of patients. Next slide, please. Okay, and so our question here is nature always inspiring, safe, and accessible? So because we know that contact with nature may not always be safe, accessible, or comfortable for all, sometimes some of us take it for granted that it is so accessible and inspiring, which is not the case for everyone. So some individuals, for example, may have grown up in urban areas and not had a chance to move comfortably and interact with nature. Or they may have specific preferences for the kinds of nature, like preferring a beach environment versus a forest, because of the experiences and the type of nature that they've had. Maybe they've grown up in an area that is often hit by hurricanes. And so in that case, maybe an environment like a forest could be considered more threatening to them because there would be danger from things like fallen trees. And so there could also be fears of specific animals that live in those environments. Things like, spiders, snakes. Nature can seem violent if those predators are common, or nature can also feel unsafe if, the predators are large or potentially dangerous. And kind of going on to group experience. So particular groups such as the Black, Indigenous, people of color, or BIPOC community may have had and may continue to have negative experiences in outdoor areas. For example, some of those groups may have been excluded legally in the past. Let's say, for example, Jim Crow laws. Some of those groups may be made to feel, uncomfortable and face aggressions. And so they may feel physically threatened in certain outdoor areas. And so those groups that have those limited outdoor experiences obviously have not had the chance to develop comfort outside, and those stereotypes that kind of follow them limit the opportunities to experience the outdoors and develop those skills so they can become more comfortable outside. So outdoor areas also can be inaccessible in terms of distance and cost. So those are like economic reasons. Nearby outdoor areas also might not be safe, again, depending on the environment, although they may become safer if they are accessed in groups or with people who have higher skill levels. And finally, interests. So an individual's specific interest may mean that the local nature around them is not as enticing. For example, we live in Florida, so maybe rock climbing is not as possible in Florida. Or if you live somewhere it's landlocked, the ocean might be hundreds of miles away. Next slide, please.
Hi, I'm Annika. I'm a med student. So Akanksha brought up some issues regarding the accessibility of healing in nature. And as a solution, this project proposes using curated nature, such as gardens, especially in museums, that can offer opportunities for safe contact with nature. Next slide, please. So on the cover slide, Anjalika introduced the Samuel P. Harn Museum of Art, which is UF's art museum, and it has a number of garden spaces, and it always has new and exciting resources. So in the next few slides, I will be showing works of art, whether from the Harn Museum, some are not, and I want you to think about how they make you feel and what images are most appealing to you. So many of these works of art in the new donated collection depict Florida nature and outdoor spaces. Some images might be recognized as safe and comfortable, while others, depending on the individual and their experiences, can be more challenging and uncomfortable. So this variety of perspectives can offer numerous opportunities. Next slide, please. So in sum, nature once removed and metaphorical, or nature in art can be a means of accessing, of recognizing safe, nurturing, comfortable, and healing outdoor environments. Next slide. And so this project uses images of nature to allow individuals to explore how they feel about nature and natural areas to find what resonates with them. Next slide. And finally, this project explores ways of engaging with that metaphorical nature to help recognize and imagine entry into a healing space. Next slide, please. Yeah, so here's just some more works of art, and really think about how these make you feel, and also what are most appealing to you, and they can vary based on the individual, based on experiences, based on likes and dislikes. It's a lot of perspective and preference. Next slide, please. So earlier I discussed metaphorical nature, which is basically nature that's been removed from actual nature and it's depicted in art. So you can avoid certain triggers that Akanksha's mentioned, certain dangerous animals or negative experiences. And once that's removed, we do have metaphorical nature, and thus it generates a safer space. It gives you a lot of variety in a museum. You have a range of choices, and within a museum or within general metaphorical nature, you also have the opportunity to explore images and spaces. Next slide, please.
Okay, so just to kind of cap it off, I know that we're kind of running a little bit low on time here, but essentially, again, we are kind of exploring this idea of using art museums as metaphorical nature and kind of engaging students, medical students, and especially patients eventually with that. And so when thinking about when I'm just going to go say really quickly, but these are kind of just like some opportunities that we've listed here for different art museum encounters. And so these are potential ways that we can kind of continue to engage, students, patients in becoming comfortable with art. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I just have about 5 minutes left here, so I'm gonna whiz through these slides, but I think I can get the idea across. So this is a picture I always like to start with, and I'm Sabo-Attwood, by the way, so I'm fairly new to this space. I'm actually the chair of the Department of Environmental and Global Health and run the wellness programs at University of Florida, but really got interested in this connection between nature and health and wellness a few years ago, and been really influenced by conversations with Don and Nina and others. So really pleased to be here. So this is the picture that I always start with because it makes me feel something for sure. And I'm probably biased because that's actually my daughter. But it always reminds me that if a 5-year-old can be in the moment and be inspired by nature, so can I. So I always start there. Next slide, please. So what I thought I would do today is just give you a little snippet of what's going on here at University of Florida with respect to green spaces and a prescription program that I've been involved with in the greater Gainesville community. So here's an aerial view of Shands Hospital. So we have a pretty big hospital here at Shands, and the outlined area there in white, the white outline has actually been turned into a green space. Some people call it a healing garden for children. Next slide, please. And I don't have a lot of pictures for time, but essentially this is the design. And there's been a lot of people that have worked really hard on putting lots of different thoughtful spaces together there in conjunction with the horticultural folks and several others that were just mentioned, that is up and running and open. It's open to everybody, but it certainly has a focus on kids with the idea that children will be prescribed to use the garden as part of their healthcare plan in the hospital. And that's actually an initiative that got stalled by COVID, but it's picking back up starting in December of this year. So I was involved in a little bit of a different aspect on that project that I won't go into today. But when we got started in thinking about prescribing the use of green space to these children, we thought about, well, how could we sort of extend that behavior once they were not in the hospital any longer? And so we started looking at where the children were discharged to, and that's sort of the aerial map over on the right-hand side. And then how could we maybe do that? So next slide, please. So we got engaged with a program many of you probably know about, which is Kids in Parks and Track Trails. And essentially this is driven by Kids in Parks is the organization. And they help folks design self-led adventures. It's kid focused for sure, where it gets them outdoors. That's essentially the goal here. And they do that in a lot of different ways. And then there's a second level on that, which is they can actually be prescribed to use the trails as part of the program. Next slide, please. So the Kids in Parks has about 180 plus or minus a few track trails that are across the nation. You can see where a lot of them are clustered. We now have the first 3 in Florida that are here in Gainesville, which are fully operational now. We have a couple others that are going in South Florida now as well. Next slide, please. One of the neat aspects about track trails is they keep track of how many children are actually using the trails. And they do that because the methods are incentivized. So if they complete the little self-led adventures, which are through brochures, they can log in to a portal and then they get badges and other sorts of prizes for doing it. But at the same time, the company's actually collecting information about who's using the trail and when and so forth. So we set out to do this to incorporate a few other trails in the communities of Gainesville. Like I said, there's 3 of them. You can see sort of the questions that we wanted to ask. Can we take small doable steps to enhance existing parts in Gainesville as an inexpensive and enjoyable way for people to tap into the positive health effects of natural settings? Can we broaden how the public values parks to include seeing them as a public health asset, and can we impact health outcomes through sustained use of the trails? And so that's sort of a research piece that I'm interested in that I won't talk too much about today. Next slide. So again, going back to the where patients live essentially, that are at Shands Hospital, we had a whole sort of framework for how we wanted to decide where the trails should be. And that was definitely one of the driving factors. But then, of course, we had to consider lots of other things like, accessibility and so forth. And so that's what we did. Next slide. And so what's included in these trails are a trailhead sign, essentially, and then you can see below the brochures. And again, these are very focused on younger children. And so an adventure might be, there's a hide and seek one where the kids have to sort of go through nature and, observe and reflect and, check off that they found something or answer a question about something. And so they're pretty neat and they're really tailored. So you work with Kids in Parks, so they're completely tailored to the setting and the flora and fauna or whatever else you're interested in that's particular to that area. So it was really fun working with Park and Recreation and horticulture folks and so forth to figure out how we should design these adventures. Next slide. And so I think just to wrap up here, because I'm at time, is, thinking about campus RX programs, could we use this sort of model to create some type of campus RX program, obviously for older individuals or to include older individuals. But could we then use this network in some way to expand their access to nature off campus as well? So sort of creating what I'm calling this community-based network. So the activity doesn't always have to be totally centralized on campus. So I'll stop there. I'm out of time and thanks for the opportunity today.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This was fabulous. What a wonderful presentation, set of presentations that we've had this morning. Thank you all so much to our speakers. We're so fortunate to have them. And this brings us to our 10 minutes for question and answers for any of our previous presenters. Unfortunately, with the exception of Jennifer Roberts, who had to catch a plane, which many thanks to Jennifer for making the time for us this morning that she did before she had to go. So what we're going to do is we actually have a volunteer. Jordan Jolly has offered to monitor the chat for your questions and pose questions to any of our speakers that we've had this morning. So
let's see. Can any of the panelists discuss funding options or opportunities that can help launch NatureRx programs? Thank you to all. That's from Linda.
I would just say part of the design and the way things were designed was to try to work with very limited financial resources so that we didn't have to find funds, at least for the project that that Anjalika, Annika, and Akanksha described.
I think that's the question that everybody wants an answer to. But I agree that's even with awareness of mental health, like and even funding for it in the K through 12 level, I think a garden would probably seem like a stretch. So, or installing, at least from my perspective, it's like it still might be a stretch, and so you have to kind of get it in another way, and then see if you can incorporate those elements.
Yeah, we've been talking about, because some of our stuff's in the community as well, kind of the community science programs where you actually get, individuals in the community on board, which doesn't really cost anything except your time to manage them, right? So that's one of the things we've been really throwing around a lot with trying to advance at least the track trail programs. And there's been quite a good bit of interest in that. So kind of a way around and trying to get, at least some of the labor part of this. And then it's great community engagement as well. So there's a lot of benefit all around to that.
Yeah, one thing I was going to mention is really getting to know your community partners and other orgs and other folks that are in your communities that are doing similar work, and that might have resources to share or to collaborate with you, like free seeds, like going back to that garden piece, or discounted or free access to certain park spaces or areas that may cost. And so just kind of seeing what your network has to offer as well. Let's see.
Yeah, I would just like to quickly add that in the Nature RX book that I co-authored, we talk about the fact that at colleges and universities, there are so many individuals who are willing to volunteer their time to the effort. After all, they're already receiving salaries. So at Cornell and at so many of your campuses, we've been able to establish Nature RX programs with very little money.
And then let's see, could we learn more about how to set up a local program with kids in parks? Any sense they might be interested in working on college campuses?
I haven't broached that with them yet. And they very well may be open to the idea. I just don't know. But I will say working with them in general was very easy, and I think they've done so many of these trails now that they actually have a process and they have 7 steps and how they do it. But their trails are very diverse. Some of them are in schools, some of them are in parks, some of them are downtown in Washington, DC. They're very different versions. And it really is whatever you want the quote sort of adventures to be is what they are, and they help you get there. So yeah, I haven't actually asked them about that yet.
Anybody else want to add to that? Okay, we have, has your guide been launched? How do you introduce students to it? Feedback from students and users thus far.
So either either Heather or I could respond to that one. The guide is ready to use. We had put in the chat how to link to it and download it. And as I mentioned in my remarks, it's ready to use right now. But also it is open to being edited and refined. So if people do download it and they have suggestions for ways to improve it, we are very open to that.
And then it looks like Heather posted the link to the guide again in the chat. So you're welcome to access that, download that, and use that as you would like. Let's see. So not much feedback so far because it is so new. So we would appreciate all the feedback you have to give, both aesthetically and content-wise. Let's see. I'm working with a student to start a student organization on campus. The organization then becomes eligible for funding from the university for $200 per year. We want to reach students who don't have transportation or means to explore nature away from campus, but we also plan to use campus and green spaces and blue spaces too. Oh, sorry, not a question, but awesome work, Christy, and a great answer to a previous question that was asked earlier about funding and getting students on campus. Some libraries have seed libraries for gardens, Nina mentioned. Also, a lot of libraries now are implementing gear share or outdoor education and learning materials that you can check out, like backpacks full of like observational tools, nature journals, that kind of thing. So check out what your local libraries have to offer.
So actually, that's perfect timing for this for us. So we just came to the end of our question and answer session for the first session of the symposium. And so I just want to once again thank all of our speakers. That was incredible. Once again, all of their slides will be posted, as well as a recording of the symposium and on the Campus Nature website. And many of our speakers are also willing for us to reach out to them directly with questions that you may have about their programs in the future. So welcome back to the 2022 Nature RX Symposium, 3rd annual. We are about to start on our second section. I think we called them, sessions. We call them sessions, sorry. Called Creative Collaborations. So all of the speakers are going to be speaking to collaborations that they've had in affiliated with their Nature RX programs. And I'm actually going to be the person to start us off. So, and forgive me, I am getting over a little bit of a cold here. So you can see that I will be followed by Dorothy Evis, and then also Ashley Hinton of the University of Kentucky. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. So welcome, everyone. Thank you again for being here today. My name is Stacey Parker, and I'm with the UC Davis Arboretum and Public Garden. My talk today is aimed at those starting new programs in particular, but also I'm hoping that established programs will also be able to glean some new insights or ideas as well. I'm going to share how accessing the power of collaboration has resulted in a campus-wide Nature RX initiative at UC Davis called Healthy Outside. So before I get into the details of the Healthy Outside initiative, I'd like to start with a quote we often use at the Arboretum and Public Garden, and is also the basis for my talk today. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can, by Arthur Ashe. This has been incredibly helpful for us when we are first starting out with a new program or project, and I will walk you through what this meant for us specifically in terms of developing our Nature RX program, and in particular, the campus-wide Healthy Outside initiative. What I will say is that for those of you looking to start a new Nature RX program at your school from scratch, the good news is that you may already have one. You just haven't been calling it that. So start where you are. For the Arboretum and Public Garden, starting where we were in terms of launching a Nature RX program meant looking around to see where we were on the road in achieving that aim. So the great part about this step is that we found, and I suspect many of you will find too, is that we had already traveled pretty far down that road in our Nature RX journey without even knowing it. In other words, looking around, the Arboretum and Public Garden already has an incredible volunteer program, an incredible student internship program called Learning by Leading, which some of you may have heard of or even have started Learning by Leading programs of your own. And we also have public programs, outreach events, and garden collections and interpretation, all designed to connect people to plants and nature in one way or another. So taking stock is pretty fun because it allows for you to see all that you have already at your disposal, including staff as resources in that aim as well. So it turns out that we already had a pretty robust Nature RX program to start. Like I said, we just weren't calling it that. So that was a fun discovery, and I suspect likewise will be the same for many of you. So the next step is to use what you have. And we at the university are lucky enough to have the brain trust of the university at our fingertips. So as you can see, there are many, many logos here for UC Davis administrative and academic departments, all of which here are those that we have been able to partner with. And one of the exciting aspects of working with the university is that there are experts in their fields around every corner. So whether it's bird experts, fish biologists, experts in plant and insect interactions, professional photographers or communications and marketing professionals, experts in sustainable agriculture, or our campus planners, sustainability experts, our grounds and landscape managers, including campus arborists, experts in public health and meditation. So the university is basically a small city of people who make the place run. So drawing on those with the expertise to do that, or those that are here teaching and conducting research in more specialized fields, such as earth sciences, Native American studies, animal sciences, etc. There's just no shortage of opportunity for partnership. And one of the major perks for us, of course, is that we don't have to pay them. And that was mentioned a little bit earlier when somebody was asking about funding, is that because we don't have to pay them, we don't have to fundraise in order to host these programs. Many, if not most of these experts have a component of their jobs that requires some degree of public service or outreach. So the other point that I also want to make is that when you're asking people to participate in sharing what they're most passionate about, it tends to result in a pretty compelling program and a feeling that you've had a behind the scenes look into their field. And I also want to point out a resource here called Healthy UC Davis. And we're pretty lucky to have that at UC Davis. So arguably the Healthy Outside initiative may never have come to be had we not had that group. So Healthy UC Davis is an interdisciplinary group composed of staff, faculty, and students dedicated to making UC Davis the healthiest place to work, learn, and live. And the steering committee of this group is the engine for collaboration within the realm of health and well-being on our campus. So without this group of people, it would have been much harder to accomplish. And I know that some other institutions also have similar steering committees. I know that there's one at Cornell, for instance. So my advice, like as such, is to find or build a similar group at your own institutions to do the same. Many of you may already have bodies already designed for this, such as mental health task forces. I advise you to insert yourself. We're as gardens, so we're a public garden. If you're a public garden program too, you may not seem like the obvious choice, but with Nature RX, we really broaden the conversation around mental health and well-being and leverage the outdoors of the campus as a resource. So once you've gathered an idea of what you're going to have to use for building out your Nature RX program in terms of identifying collaborative partners, the next step is to do what you can. So in setting out to create the Healthy Outside initiative, we realized that first we needed a web page. We started by creating a web page on the Healthy UC Davis website, including gathering and organizing Healthy Outside resources from all of our campus partners. And then we lumped them into 3 categories that you'll see here: move outside, restore outside, and grow outside. We created a Healthy Outside resource map and also a Healthy Outside calendar. So events that fell into the category of Healthy Outside could be highlighted on our page. And once those resources were all in place, then we needed a way to promote the initiative. So which led us to creating a campaign. And we're on a quarter system here at UC Davis. So we chose spring quarter to hold our campaign. And quarters are 10 weeks long. So that's how long our campaign was. And we realized that in order to get people to participate, we need some kind of incentive. So we started drawing on all of our partners in Healthy UC Davis to chip in any swag that they had related to being healthy outside. So you can see our swag bag on here. And then also, once again, these are all the specific campus partners that we drew upon for this campaign. The swag bag had a lot of goodies such as water bottle slings, and an Arboretum and Public Garden tote bag, a reusable straw, a picnic blanket, a cutting board. There were lots of really wonderful things. So that was really exciting because once again, this was just about reaching out and seeing who could donate 10 of these items, basically for the duration of our campaign. And so no money, once again, all donated. So then the next thing that we had to do was to determine what people had to do in order to be entered into a drawing for the prizes. This meant coming up with rules, a structure, how we would manage it, etc., for how it would all work, and then creating a page to publish all of this information along with the supplemental publicity materials. So we decided to have people share photos of themselves doing something healthy outside and answering a couple of questions. So they could do this through a Google form, or they could also do it through social media on Instagram. And the questions that they answered were how to stay healthy outside, what they do to stay healthy outside themselves, and then also why they think it's important to be healthy outside. And then we called these testimonials. And submitting one of these actually was basically your raffle ticket for being entered into the drawing. So then the testimonials started pouring in, and we were quite happy with the results. We had maybe over 350 throughout the campaign. We also had a colleague in our communications unit, so talk about collaboration, that kept adding them to the webpage as the weeks went by, and also highlighting the winner's entry. We also specifically reached out to our campus leadership, as you will see pictured here in the middle. And we have their answers posted. I wanted to get more photos in so you could see more of the photos. So you don't see the answers for these other folks, but you can see like a little sampling of the submissions with these photos. So it's really really sweet and very touching how many people participated. And there was no limit to how many times that you could enter. Okay, so I also wanted to mention that while we were working on this larger steering committee, actually it was a small team of the larger steering committee members of the Healthy UC Davis on this larger campaign. I was also directing our programs at the Arboretum and Public Garden to be aligning up into delivering on this effort of Healthy Outside. So you'll actually see from this slide several photos of partnerships that the Arboretum and Public Garden had with classes and student artists in our art department and our design department. So once again, the power of collaboration allowed for us to host these wonderful student works of art in the Arboretum at a time when our staff were at capacity, basically trying to rebuild from the impacts of COVID. And these collaborations are incredibly positive for all parties involved. Obviously, our visitors loved them. And with minimal effort, primarily coordination, logistics, and support on our part, we were able to host these interesting and exciting art installations in the Arboretum to attract people to be healthy outside. And the students loved having the venue of the Arboretum to display their art and all of the interaction and attention that their works were able to enjoy from the location. For this last slide, I also wanted to point out the few but very lightweight interventions that we did do as programs, the first of which was called Chair Share, that's in the bottom left. And Haven and I actually learned of chair bombing at a past symposium and immediately said that we wanted to do it ourselves, but our strategic communications department on campus didn't like the term chair bombing. So it was named, the program was named Chair Share, which has stuck and it really works. People love it. It couldn't be easier. And the results from our surveys indicate that people chose to spend more time in nature that day because of them. And I also have pictured here a couple of events that were billed as Nature RX events as part of the Healthy Outside campaign. And those were a planting event, a weeding therapy session, and these were a great opportunity for us to get much needed work done in the garden while also affording others the opportunity to connect with campus nature. So start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And with the power of collaboration, you're bound to be successful. Thank you so much. And I'm going to transition to our next speaker, Dorothy.
Thank you, Stacey. That was amazing. I couldn't keep up with all my notes. So hello, everybody. My name is Dorothy Ibis. I am faculty at William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia in the Environment and Sustainability program. I regularly teach courses in science communication, GIS, and ecotherapy. I'm a trained ecotherapy guide, and I also run the Parks and Ecotherapy Research Lab. This is a campus nature lab I run with a number of very talented and passionate students. We do outreach, including Campus Park RX and the Campus Green Space Map and the chair bombing. We also conduct research. We are currently working on 2 new research projects. The first exploring the role of remotely guided nature and forest therapy sessions on place attachment, mental health, and nature connection among Latina participants. This is in collaboration with Kathy Wolf at the University of Washington and Tamberly Conway of Conservation Connections. And this one is funded by the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, founded by Amos Clifford. The second study is a collaboration with the William & Mary Library and an experimental psychology colleague and good friend of mine, evaluating the mental health and productivity potential of nature-rich indoor study and workspaces among college students. I'm also co-writing a book called Ecotherapy with Everyone with Carolyn Schuyler. She is the founder and director of Wild Rock Nature Play Center. If you want any more information about this particular stuff, you can visit us at parksresearchlab.com. I can put that in the chat if anybody's interested in that stuff, because I won't be talking about that really today. So I'm also the co-chair of the Campus Nature RX Network with Don Rakow. So before I go into my presentation, I just want to take a minute to really thank Haven and Stacey for their incredible work coordinating this year's symposium. It is a ton of work. So thank you so much for dedicating your time to that. Also, thanks to all of our fellow presenters, amazing presentations. I'm so inspired. This is one of my favorite events of the year, getting to share ideas and learn so much from everybody in the network. I'm so excited about how this network has grown. There was 4 of us who kind of chatted about this when Don Rakow was writing his book in 2019, and now we have just this huge network. It's just fantastic, and the creativity and the impact is really amazing. So thanks to all of you. Again, if you'd like to keep up with the network, I just want to say you can visit campusnature.com on the homepage. You can subscribe to the monthly newsletter. If you have an active Campus Nature program, you can complete the membership form also on the homepage, and we will make a simple website for your program where visitors can find out more about your program and contact you directly. We also have links on the website to resources, including Don Rakow's framework for developing of a new Campus Nature RX program. So it's a really great step-by-step guide. Also, Don and Laura Brown's Guide to Anti-Racism in the Outdoors, a link to Don Rakow's book on Campus Nature RX, and many other resources. So, but today I'm actually going to talk about something different, something kind of in the works. It's a new course I developed for this fall called Mapping for Community Nature RX. Next slide, please. So I have to start by giving credit to Allie Ward and her guests on an Ologies podcast from August 2021. In the episode, Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Alex Bloomberg present this Venn diagram approach to deciding what you should do in this case to help save the planet. So I loved this idea. Simply put, you make this Venn diagram outlining 1, what is the work that needs doing? 2, what brings you joy? And 3, what are you good at? So you work then with what shows up in the middle. I applied this approach to deciding what to do when I was asked last year to design a new freshman course for environment and sustainability, which integrates GIS and alternative forms of communication. So I asked myself during many, many walks in nature, 1, what would be a valuable and healthy educational experience for William and Mary freshmen? So normally I teach junior and seniors. This is my first year in almost a decade teaching freshmen. 2, what do I enjoy teaching? And number 3, what am I good at? Specifically, what are my interests and expertise and strengths? Next slide, please. So the course I came up with was Mapping for Community Nature RX. So the course has 5 main units, all informing and culminating in a course project, which is a public-facing interactive Esri story map that integrates maps, videos, audios, images, and text to share the story of our local green space, support visitation, particularly among underrepresented groups. Next slide, please. So the first couple weeks of class were dedicated to the introduction and background. For this unit, I introduced key themes related to this topic. This integrates human environment geography, urban park planning and design, sustainability, science communication, place-based storytelling, community health, environmental justice, nature and health more broadly, nature RX, ecopsychology, and ecotherapy. I also introduced key theories, including attention restoration theory, attachment theory as applied to our attachment specifically to nature, stress reduction theory, biophilia, and nature deficit disorder. We had lots of pair work and small group discussions about the themes and theories just to get the students thinking and talking and getting to know each other their first semester at William & Mary. I then introduced the course project, and the purpose of the project was to facilitate community health and well-being through nature engagement, primarily by addressing and seeking to overcome barriers to nature engagement, and two, by increasing visitation to local green space by diverse community members through engaging, inspirational, and supportive multimedia storytelling and what I call curated park experiences. Next slide. So given the audience for our course projects are groups underrepresented in parks and green space, we needed to better understand why there is underrepresentation in the first place. So we had an in-depth deconstruction and discussion of a research paper I recently co-wrote with Don Rakow and Chris Kim from Cornell on the barriers to nature engagement by one of the most underrepresented populations, youth of color. I can actually, if anyone's interested, I will put a link to this in the chat. And if you don't have access to this, feel free to email me. I'm going to put that in the chat as well. So this paper summarizes some of the literature regarding the cognitive, external, psychological, and social benefits of nature engagement or time spent in and around nature. And it highlights that there are inequitable patterns of participation at nature sites, parks, and other green spaces in the U.S. This disparity is particularly striking among youth of color, which limits this population's ability to gain the same benefits of nature engagement as their counterparts. So the purpose of this study was to better understand the barriers to nature engagement by youth of color by examining intensive, semi-structured interviews of community leaders and leaders of nature-oriented organizations. So for the course, student teams were assigned a part of the paper to read and summarize. All the notes were organized in a shared Google Doc. They then shared with the class, and this led into this really rich discussion aimed at gaining a better understanding of the key barriers that face our target population for this semester's course project. Next slide, please. So this is a table of results from the paper that outlines these key barriers organized under the three main categories of barriers, so external, psychological, and socioeconomic. So the top three barriers to nature engagement by youth of color across categories were found to be lack of accessibility, fear, and social exclusion. So if you're interested in more details on that, please check out that paper. Many students commented that this paper and exercise was very enlightening, introducing concepts and ideas that they had never before considered, and seemed to be very valuable to their understanding of the audience for our projects, namely people who are underrepresented in these places, don't feel comfortable for various reasons, and how to successfully engage them with this project. Next slide. So our second unit was study areas, and this is where we began to hone in on our local park spaces. Next slide. So the course project is a team effort. So at this stage, we formed student teams with complementary skills. So the team positions include a study area lead, a field data collection lead, a story map lead, and written communications leads. I had them all sign up for something that they felt they had some kind of strength in, and then put them together in those groups. Each team then selected one of seven local parks to cover for the semester. And at this stage, students conducted secondary data collection for their parks, completing a comprehensive park audit form that I created. They then orally presented their study areas in class using a shared Google Slides presentation. Next slide, please. So the third unit was field data collection. Next slide. So during field data collection, students use the ArcGIS Field Maps app to collect spatial and attribute data, field notes, images, video clips, and audio recordings at their park study sites. Data were collected for a set of significant natural and cultural features, ecotherapy sites, key amenities, trails, and picnic spots. We really honed in on just a select, as opposed to mapping everything. I had them really just select the best things to see at the park. Next slide, please. So we had a practice run on campus to try out field maps. Then the students went on van trips to parks to collect data for their study area. And this is a map showing the GPS data points and lines students collected at the 7 parks. And this is in the ArcGIS online platform. Next slide, please. So this is just an image of students getting ready for their van trip. Next slide. And some images from the field, from the parks they visited. Next, please. And then we just finished recently our cartography in ArcGIS online unit, during which students have been processing their data and creating some basic maps. Next slide. So this is an example working map from one of the groups. These are really first drafts that will be refined and kind of reimagined for the Story Maps platform during the rest of the semester. Next slide. So this week I introduced place-based storytelling. The topics included an overview of place-based storytelling, the various points of view in storytelling, and how we can effectively communicate the stories of our park spaces using a digital storytelling platform. I also led a storytelling ecotherapy exercise that explored the journey of a selected natural item that they brought to class, and having them craft a story about the places it had been. And that was either actual, if they knew, or imagined kind of story of this item, this natural item. Next, please. Oh, actually, next slide. We also reviewed and shared inspirational examples of place-based story maps, such as this one on the Voices of the Grand Canyon. In the coming weeks, students will be integrating their study area research, their field data, their images, videos, and audio clips and maps into a story map of their own to support visitation to green space by those in our community. Next slide, please. So I wanted to get a sense of how students were responding to this course. It felt like things were going really well, but sometimes you can't tell as the professor what exactly they're feeling, especially when they're freshmen. They tend to not want to give you feedback sometimes. So last week I asked them to fill out an evaluation form sharing what they liked best, if they had suggestions for improvement, and if they would recommend the course to others. And I think some of these results are really valid to what we're doing today. Even in different types of programming. So overall, it was very positive. There was a lot of enthusiasm about the topics and the skills, particularly the theory and practice of ecotherapy, the concept of nature for health and well-being, working with ArcGIS, storytelling about park spaces, and the Story Maps platform. As far as improvements, they wanted more trips to parks, more material kind of on all the topics, and they were hoping to get more time outside. So some of these requests are unfortunately impossible given just the class size, the limited time in the semester, and the need for technology in this course, but these points really reflect a real appreciation for the course themes and the skills, and I'll definitely consider how to incorporate more of these in next year's iteration. So also, I intentionally designed the course with a really solid structure, but room for a bit of flexibility to remain responsive during the semester. I found this flexibility immensely helpful, even though it was a little bit nerve-wracking not to have every detail kind of nailed down, but I found it was really helpful in being able to adjust as needed to accommodate the needs and the interests of the students as we moved along. And so I was able to kind of shuffle things around just a little bit to accommodate that. One thing I was most interested in knowing was if the students would recommend the course to others. I'm happy to report that 100% said yes, that they would, some very enthusiastically. This is like 1/2 of the responses. I love the exclamation points and the smiley faces here. Next slide, please. Oh no, sorry, previous slide. 2 up.
I'm sorry. I think, Dorothy, I think we're at time.
Okay, no worries.
Thank
you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. What a course. Oh my gosh. No wonder everybody like 100% say like they would recommend it to others. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our next speakers, Shane Tedder and Ashley Hinton. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dorothy. I want to jump in that class too, and I'm going to talk about a class that I was able to propose at the University of Kentucky. So we're going to talk offline a little bit after this too. So I'm Ashley Hinton-Monser. I am with the University of Kentucky, and as some of you can recall, 2019 there was a call for proposals for a Wildcats in the Park course, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And I also have with me my amazing colleague and friend, Shane Tedder. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Shane, real quick.
Hey, Ashley, thank you. Happy to be back. I had the opportunity to present with this group last year, and I'm thrilled to report on some of the progress we've made on the projects that I introduced last year.
So next slide, please. So when we think back to 2019, I know this flyer says 2022. These were actual pictures from the course that we were able to take in 2020. But in 2019, there was a call for proposals, collaboration between the university and Airmark, and for us to be able to use some of their sites for some academic purposes or student engagement purposes. And so I put a proposal together to teach this Nature RX course, and I selected one of the parks, and they reached back out to me and they said, how does Utah and Arizona sound? And of course that sounded absolutely amazing. I was willing to go anywhere. And so a group of students were able to participate in this course. The proposal and the call to actions came about again pre-COVID. So moving forward, there were a lot of delays. And then I got the call back of, are you still interested? This is summer 2021, where we want students to be engaged, to have these immersive experiences, but there's still some challenges to doing so. And so I was, of course, willing to still move forward. I collaborated with someone out of the College of Nursing, as my role is predominantly staff. And so I put the proposal together, the call to action to allow for the Nature RX course. I reached out to Don there at Cornell, and that was my first interaction and opportunity to engage with this amazing group of colleagues across the US. And so he consulted with me, looked at the syllabus, looked at the plan, said, of course, he would love to come at a non-COVID timing. And so one day maybe that dream will come to fruition there. But we were able to pull in 5 national parks as we were staying there in Utah area. And then we were able to go to the Grand Canyon, do some slot canyon tours and some other things in that space. We did sand surfing. Of course, we did a whole lot of meditation walks. I've worked closely with the Koru, mindfulness and meditation. So we were able to incorporate all of those practices in it as well. And the student engagement was phenomenal. They immediately wanted to meet with the VP as soon as we returned to make sure, even though this was a one-time call to action, that something continued around this space. So next slide, please. The course proposal, again, I mentioned the syllabi. I worked really closely with Dawn on to really, how can we do this work? How do we measure it? So we actually did some pre-fitness assessment, health assessments, and then some post-fitness and health assessments. We, again, were in this unique time of 2021 summer where we were still not 100% comfortable with engagement. Some of the parks that we wanted to go to, especially the slot canyon tours, they were not open for public. So we were constantly reevaluating and shifting our plan. But we did stay in Lake Powell, Arizona and Utah area. It's right there on the line. And since then, obviously, there's been a lot of news around that space with the decrease in the water there, but we were able to do some kayaking and some other adventures while we were there. We were able to meet with some of the local tribes there, but that was a little bit more delicate and difficult to coordinate. Student recruitment was harder during this time again, as a lot of our international trips were getting canceled. So they were pushing these staycation type trips or the stay in the US type trips as opportunities. And so we were able to pick up some students from that as well. I mentioned the collaboration between College of Nursing. And so that was also a unique combination of things, since oftentimes the nursing curriculum is pretty heavy and what they need to take in order to get through their program. So we did not have a single College of Nursing student participate in the course. We had non-students just using that as their elective credit. So lesson learned on that one, to be really mindful in that collaboration to ensure that more students felt that they were able to attend. Since then, though, College of Nursing loved this and supported it so much that they have tried to work through a similar course offering, whether it be a travel or not, they're still working through to be able to make that part of that curriculum opportunity for College of Nursing students to where it would not just be an elective, but it would be something they could build into their program. Also within that space, following the return of this trip, working collaboratively with multiple colleges across the University of Kentucky's campus, other faculty member in business and economics and the fine arts and other Lewis Honors, some of the other ones have been exploring what about a general ed type course that all of their students would have access to. And then each of those be whether they're around Kentucky or if they leave and go internationally or if they go nationally and really have that opportunity to do so. I think the biggest part and time I spent on this was the adventure planning. Again, that timing of which where can we get into a park? Do we as it closed because we were still just barely opening up at this timing of things. We went in May of 21. And so things were shifting on a regular basis. And the only thing we did know is we had rooms, but the adventure planning was day by day, which actually ended up being a win for, I think the most creative thing we did was sand surfing, and that was just on a whim. We had some extra money in the account to be able to pay for the students to do that adventure and do a slot canyon tour that was different than the Antelope Canyon tour that we originally had hoped to do, but that was still closed at the time we were there. And so it ended up being one of those more adventurous things we did that students still rave about, talk about, and still text me. Remember that time we did this amazing trip? So affordability is something I was definitely mindful of. I wanted to make it open and available to all students. So moving forward, we had conversations with our VP to talk about scholarships or opportunities to make this more inclusive of as this was a little bit more expensive. We were still, again, in that time where travel was not outrageous as it is now because people were not traveling as much in 2021 summer. This trip now would probably cost double based on the flight alone. But we were able to do some of the things to make this as affordable. And actually our VP put in several $1,000s to cover the expenses of the instructors and some of those additional food expenses. So students going into it thought they were going to be covering all of their food, but the VP actually put enough money in to give them an allowance where they had all of their meals covered. So no additional costs were included. And that was something that they were invested in based on even just listening to the students upon their return and also seeing those results, those health results and the impact that this trip had. Many of the students had never even traveled outside of the state of Kentucky that went with us. And so this was their first time not only doing a travel trip of any sort, but doing a trip with campus, on campus here with campus people anyway, to be able to get comfortable with leaving the state of Kentucky. So next slide there. So we did use the Nature Fix. We also did use Dawn's book there, Nature RX, and we had a collaboration of readings as part of the academic component. And then we were able to pull those lessons in. So within this space, they gave us a room that lodge of which we stayed, allowed us space to do mindfulness classes, yoga classes, as well as the reading and conversations. And then we did have assignments within this to where we would talk about the chapters of the book of which they read. Moving forward in that conversation, I would definitely be more mindful of making those assignments maybe easier to not have to submit while we were away, as found out really quickly, internet was not very stable where we were staying or any of the trips of which we were on. And so oftentimes our phones alone were not reachable in any way, shape, or form. And then next slide there. So Shane, I'm going to pass it over to you. So mentioning a little bit about that class, but from this class and in some of the conversations I've been able to have with campus partners through this work has really built a stronger network across the University of Kentucky's NatureRx initiative here, where we have a lot of those pieces of things working. They were a little bit more siloed, but Shane and I have been working timelessly to get those a little bit more bridged. So Shane, I'm going to pass it to you now.
Thanks, Ashley. I think I've got about 3 minutes, and I'll focus on just another aspect of what I think falls under this category of creative collaboration. And I showed this slide last year, and it's a good jumping off point. This is looking down from the patient tower of our hospital. And a lot of the green space that you see there is on the roof, and it's there intentionally visible from the patient tower because of our former executive vice president for health affairs, understanding that there was healing power in even being able to see nature. And so that hospital is really at the core of a major healthcare enterprise for us. And that's a space that we continue to work in to promote NatureRx. And one way that we're doing that is to work with a transdisciplinary team to infuse NatureRx driven guidelines into the construction standards for capital projects that happen on our medical center. And so last year I spoke about a pilot project that was looking to implement NatureRx in a small courtyard. The design principles that are developed as part of implementing that project are intended to be integrated in our construction standards so that any capital construction project that happens on our healthcare campus, and there are several underway, infuses those principles of NatureRx with it. And so we're excited to be working with several healthcare leaders, including Dr. Connie Jennings, who leads our Center for Integrative Medicine, and our campus planner, Maureen Dreckman, who I believe may also be on the call as a co-leader on that project. So we're excited to track that one as it moves forward and hopefully scales up the impact of that pilot. Happy to answer questions about it, and I will stop there so that we can shift to panel and questions.
And once again, Jordan Jolly is going to help by managing the chat for questions and posing them to.
You guys are making me wish that I could go back to undergrad. This is incredible. Oh, I'm like, okay, who do I tell about this? How do I get involved? Okay, so we've got a couple questions. There's one from Catherine, and it was, I believe, during Dorothy, your presentation, and it just says, what did preferences include?
Oh, so that must be referring to the research paper that I talked about, the barriers to nature engagement. I wouldn't want to, off the top of my head, give a full definition of that category, so I'm gonna have to get back to her on that one.
Fair enough. Next question is, I'm curious about who signed up for the class. Were there many students from underrepresented groups? Did you have a sense of their experience with the course? And I believe this was for the William and Mary college course.
Well, for my course, so I've got actually 2 sections of this course, and there's 54 students across both sections, which is bigger than I designed it for. I designed it for 20, but we have a huge incoming class right now, so I expanded it. But I'm very pleased. There's a lot of diversity in this class, which is not true for some of the courses I teach. So I have found that. And what was the other part of the question?
Did you have a sense of their experiences when developing the course or with the course itself?
Well, I did the best I could to imagine, again, this is my first time ever teaching freshmen, to imagine, trying to remember what it was like to be a college freshman, being in college for the first time and being in a new environment, wanting to get to know that place, wanting to get to know each other, having just a lot of uncertainty, a lot of newness. And as far as, I just assumed that many of them would have little to no kind of experience having been in natural settings or with these kind of topics. And that seems to be pretty much the case with most of the students.
Ashley, I know you kind of touched on, but if you want to add to that.
So given the way this was written, it was more of the proposal idea, call for action. So not as much of an opportunity to plan with students in mind or what even major or college I was partnering with as I started the process with that. However, one of the things we definitely did encourage and discuss moving forward, if this were going to be offered again as an ongoing opportunity, is to provide those scholarships and those resources and partnering with certain offices on our campus or areas on our campus where we could get a more diverse group of students. There was a bit of a cost to the course, obviously, as we were traveling out west from Kentucky. And so that added to just a barrier to access. We did, from a unique perspective, as I mentioned before, have students that had never even left the state of Kentucky participate in this course, which is its own uniqueness with our state here. So.
Mega is asking, can you elaborate on the GIS segment? I was wondering if there was any mapping more on the social and cultural aspects of the community along with the geographical mapping.
I'm assuming that's directed to me.
That's for you, Dorothy.
Yeah, so no, we didn't get into that just because, we kind of already had a lot to cover and to do. And I really felt, again, thinking about freshmen and what would be valuable for them, I really felt like what I wanted to do was this is kind of like a taste tester, as it's kind of an appetizer of ecotherapy, of GIS, of storytelling, and more than anything, it was more to kind of whet their appetite and help direct them towards where might I want to go from here and learn more. So it's kind of like I think in science communication, the purpose of a piece sometimes can be just to get people interested in pursuing it further. And I just felt it's so important because I had a lot of juniors and seniors over the years who said, I wish I would have known about these concepts, these skills, these technologies, these practices when I was a freshman. So that's kind of where I went with that. And I love that they were like, we just want more, like we need to do more of all this. It's great. That tells me that they are interested. So I guide them then to like other courses where they can further develop those skills and practices.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds like you need a whole minor just for that.
Yes.
All right, and it looks like Dorothy also put some elaboration on the preferences in the chat for those of you who are interested. And then we've got another question directed towards Stacey, which is, how did you actually reach the students with the Healthy Outside campaign?
That's a good question. So I'd say that via social media, we partnered with a lot of groups on campus that did posts that encouraged people to participate in the campaign. And the swag was really, really popular. As a matter of fact, I was telling some of my students about the sheep. There was one, we're going to have a presentation at the very end by Haven Kiers about sheep mowers. So these sheep that come and like mow our lawn in the middle of campus. And she has these sheep mowers t-shirts. And that was so we had like the standard prize pack, but then we usually had like a featured, like really nice, extra nice prize that we didn't have like 10 of for that week. And my student was like, which week are you like raffling off the sheep mowers t-shirt? Because that's what I want. So basically, I think just going after the things that the students wanted, giving them the opportunity to share, and like so many of them are so accustomed to sharing their stories on social media and photos of themselves. So it's just a really positive way for us to channel that. So I think that we kind of by virtue of what we chose, like how we chose to engage people in that participation, we were able to do that. And then we have certain groups in our Healthy UC Davis network that have listservs and also like groups of students that really follow them. And we asked them to basically like share our posts and promote the Healthy Outside campaign as well. So that's basically what we tried to do. If that answers your question.
Thank you. It looks like we have a couple more for you, Stacey. So this one is, following your outdoor challenge, did the testimonials continue beyond the 10-week campaign timeframe? Did it grow organically, and does it still continue to grow today?
Yeah, that's true. There's still, you can still submit a testimonial, and people still are submitting testimonials, which is really, really sweet. And the communications person that puts them up on the website, we asked them, like, oh, is this too much? You want to stop? And they said that they just love reading them so much that they love continuously adding more. And it's just, so that webpage is still live. It's the only thing that we've taken down is all of the campaign information and the prize packs and those rules and everything. And in terms of like who did all of the work, it was like a small group of partners. So there were like employees in our staff and faculty health and well-being department on campus. They work for occupational health, and there are some of the leaders in our Healthy UC Davis group. They're big leaders, so they were a major help. We also have our finance, operations, and administration communications department. We had somebody affiliated from that group. So we're actually fortunate here at UC Davis that our chancellor gave $150,000 of funding for the Healthy UC Davis group to continue. And most of that funding goes to actually these small grant projects for people on campus to do health and well-being based projects. And like everything from diabetes to prevention to like, programs, art programs targeted at AB 540 students, like lots and lots of different things. Some of it goes to supporting the time of some of those staff people as well. But anyway, so that funding also allows for that FOA, that's the Finance, Operations, and Administration Communications person, to have a little bit of funding to support the work of Healthy UC Davis. So we're fortunate that those people really helped. And then because this actually fits pretty squarely within what I do for the Arboretum and Public Garden as the Director of Public Horticulture and Engagement, I was able to do a lot of my time, like my time actually went to this because it's really trying to promote that which we're working on promoting with the Arboretum and Public Garden as well.
Thank you, Stacey. Looks like we have one more for you. Could you share a little more about what the chair share entailed?
Yeah, so the neatest thing about the chair share is that it's literally buying these plastic Adirondack chairs. You need a place to store them, which luckily we have a place to store them, and we also have a way of transporting them. We have this tricycle that was in one of the photos. So we're lucky to have that as well. But it's literally putting out the chairs, putting them out, and we advertise them. We typically do them on Fridays from like 10 to 2. We have student ambassadors that put them out. They don't necessarily monitor them, but sometimes they'll set up a table nearby. We do have some signage that says have a seat. And then it says like a little thing like, enjoy these chairs. They're put here for you to be able to take a few extra moments to enjoy nature or something like that. And we also have a Sacramento campus associated with UC Davis. It's our health system campus. And we have a satellite chair share operation there. It's just so easy and lightweight that and people really take to it. The fact that they can move things around, they can gather them up and meet in a small, like a small group, or they can be off on their own. We just put it by our Arboretum waterway, and they've just been really popular, and they're really sweet. So yeah, that's simple. I hope that helps. And we'll be starting our third and final session, Innovation in Programming. And our first speaker is going to be Cindy Jones.
My name is Cindy Jones. I'm a faculty member in ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Connecticut. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to talk about our process as we begin our truly what is just our second year of NatureRx programming. My motivation, well, I should back up and say that my research focuses on plant adaptations to the environment. And I also put this picture in to remind myself to tell you that I'm also the director of our Plant Biodiversity Conservatory, and you'll see in a minute why that's relevant. But my motivation for starting NatureRx at UConn is twofold. One is that, you know, I care a lot about the natural world. I've been studying it my entire career. But the other is that I also care deeply about my students. And so I was first introduced to NatureRx, or the idea of NatureRx, in 2019. And I guess we'll have the next slide. I guess before I get to that part, I just wanted to say that I stumbled across this description of the vision, or the vision statement for Parks RX recently, and realized that there's this one line: spending time in and around nature is the single most important first step to improving both human and planetary health. Sort of really encapsulates my motivation, as I'm sure it does for many of us at this symposium. Next slide. So I started NatureRx after reading Don Rakow's book, and I decided to approach it basically using his guide, which I thought, or their guide, Don Rakow and Gabriel's books, which was really helpful. And so I set about contacting people that I thought would be interested, and contacted administrators, things like that. And we had our first meeting in February of 2020. And shortly thereafter, it became very clear we weren't going to be meeting in person anymore. So we decided instead, a graduate student in my lab works on, he had done taken some GIS courses, and he wanted to work on his mapping skills. So next slide. He and I decided that we would spend the pandemic, to the extent that we could, building a website. So we also worked with another graduate student in our department who was a website developer, and the website is here. What Henry did was to contact all of the local regions in the town of Mansfield. I wanted to focus on the town of Mansfield because it's where UConn is. And it's also a fairly heavily wooded area. UConn's a fairly rural campus. And so we contacted the local organizations that maintain trails. The town maintains trails. There are trails through Connecticut forest or UConn forest property, and there are trails that are owned and maintained by a local nature conservancy organization. And Henry acquired their map layers and then put them all together into this single package, which we then brought up to the website. And you can see that we've organized these both in terms of where people might want to go through locations, and then also in terms of activities. One of the things we discovered, this was the first time anybody had brought all these map layers together, and we have over 121 miles of trails just in the town of Mansfield alone. So a lot of potential hiking places for people if they just knew how to get there. But the other thing we acknowledged is that people, especially students that are on campus for the first time and in a rural environment for the first time, may not feel comfortable hiking. And so we also inventoried all of the quiet spaces on campus that were places with benches under trees and places with a view. And so if you actually want to look for those, you can go to those too. Next slide. We officially launched the website at a symposium that we timed to coincide with the symposium last year, Everyone's Earth. That was also right about that time in the fall. And the mini symposium that we ran was structured so that it invited researchers from across campus who, in one way or another, work on the relationship or the interaction between humans and health. And so we had speakers from a range of departments, including natural resources and the environment and family studies, all brought together. And then after the symposium, we formed what I thought of as more official steering committee and spent a couple of meetings just talking about possible activities, things that we could do to launch Nature RX. And it very quickly became clear, next slide, to us that there was far more that we could do in terms of possibility than we could probably actually realistically do. And it became clear also that we would need a mission statement, as in we would need to figure out what our own skills and strengths and interests were, and then tailor whatever program we launched accordingly. And so this is the latest statement of our mission statement. And rather than focusing on writing prescriptions, because our mental health facilities were completely overwhelmed at this point and had other priorities, which I totally understand, we decided that we would focus on promoting the benefits of spending time in nature and then developing activities for the Yukon community, but especially for students, and then also trying to foster collaborations among researchers. Next slide. One of the first things we did was to then have a student focus group. And this was really interesting for me. I'd never done this kind of a thing. We had a facilitator from Student Health and Wellness who was doing an internship on Nature RX, and she's the one who facilitated it. And one of the first questions we ask is, given the pandemic and all of the media attention to the fact that nature was good for you, how much do you feel like you guys really understand? And the answer was pretty much across the board. Yeah, we know that being in nature is good for us, but we can't always make ourselves do it, right? Or that they forget to do the things that are good for them. And the other thing that came out of this is that because being a student comes first, and then maybe they would take care of mental health. And so they felt like we really needed things that would emphasize the positive effects of being in nature, as, for example, students walked across campus. And so we talked about possibly identifying these short sort of 10-minute mindfulness walks, things like that. The students also emphasized that the activities needed to be intentional and interactive. And I completely agree with that. But when I brought this back to the steering committee, the question was, intentional towards what? Is this intentional towards moving your own mental health? Or do we just sort of focus on getting people outside? I mean, what really are our goals here? And a group I was talking to recently said, well, if you want to advertise Nature RX activities, maybe you could make it in terms, or package it in terms of investing in self. This is a self-investment, right? Being in nature is really good for you, and you will benefit from it. So sort of self-care more than mental health specifically. And then the other thing, which has already been mentioned, is that they suggested that rather than sort of taking on a lot of initiatives that were only Nature RX, that we would partner with existing clubs. And I think that's what we're going to do, as well as they suggested that we emphasize freshmen, because they said by the time students are juniors, they're way too busy. And I think that's a really, really good idea. So with this in mind, and with cold weather in mind, one of the things that we did last spring, was to jointly sponsor with the Plant Biodiversity Conservatory what we called a houseplant workshop. This was just a one-day event, and we had them held it at the greenhouses. And it wasn't just a plant giveaway, which is always also popular, but instead, next slide, please. We combined sort of, well, we had propagated a bunch of plants in the greenhouse, and then what we did was had the staff present basic information on how to care for houseplants, sort of talking about some of the nuances that maybe a first-time houseplant owner might not consider, like why you would choose one type of soil or media over another, how to tell if you're overwatering your plants, why succulents are different, for example, from tropical plants. And then next slide. After a bit of instruction, we had provided students with the plants that we had propagated. As we said, they got to choose their plants, they got to choose their pots, and decorate their pots if they wanted to, and plant them up and carry them out. And this was really, you know, most of the supplies were donated by the greenhouses, and it was a pretty popular event. But I learned a couple of important things from this event. One of them was that I had originally hoped to use this event to advertise NatureRx across campus, and the fact that NatureRx was holding events or co-sponsoring events. And so we knew we had only a limited number of slots. We set up the situation so we had 12 students come in, but we had 12 students, 3 different time periods. So we had a room for a total of 36 students, and we had them sign up through the website. And all of that was, I thought, really a great idea, and I was hoping it would fill, et cetera, et cetera. And then we announced it on the EEB Greenhouse's Instagram account, and all the slots were gone in 50 minutes. So, you know, so much for rolling it out to the broader community, right? That just didn't work very well. The second thing I learned from this is that on the day of event, over a third of the students didn't show up, even though they had signed up. And so if you do NatureRx related events with limited slot time or limited space, overbook. That was the next thing that we learned, and that's what we'll do in the future. One of the other things that I did, can we go back one slide? Oops, not all, there. Is that you can see that we had designed a logo by a fellow faculty member who just enjoys designing logos that you can see here on the left. And we had the QR code linked to our website, and I talked in the event about the NatureRx and what it meant. But later in the semester, I also took this same sign to a tabling event in honor of Earth Day, and with no other information other than the sign, hoping that that would attract students to come ask us what it was. And I just wanted to tell you that I think for those of you who are designing logos, we're going to consider adding more explanation to ours, because most of the students who came up assumed that we were talking about medicinal plants or using medicinal plants to feel better, or that we were actually talking about cannabis. So again, a lesson learned in that regard. We may change our logo a little bit. And then 2 slides forward. Okay, time's up. I just wanted to say we're also partnering on a project or an initiative called Mindfulness for Earth through our Global Affairs Office. And I can talk more about that if anyone's interested. Thank you. Next slide is my acknowledgements or supporters on campus.
Great. Thank you so much, Cindy. Wonderful. Okay, so we'll transition to Victoria.
I thank you for having me here. And I am an associate professor in environmental studies at California State University in Monterey Bay. And I'm also a co-chair of a newly formed NatureRx working group that's part of our president's sustainability committee at CSUMB. So our institution is a Hispanic serving institution. Roughly half of our students are first generation and come from underrepresented minority populations and communities. And we have students who come from the Central Coast region where we are in the state, but also from across California and some from other parts of the country as well. So we're considered a destination campus, and that a lot of people choose to come to this university because of our location. Next slide, please. So what I want to share is a little bit about our work with the Living Community Challenge. So the Living Community Challenge is a framework from the Living Futures Institute. They started out focusing explicitly on buildings and fostering relationships between people and reaffirming our relationships to nature through the built environment. And then they extended that out to also focus on communities, more broadly speaking, of how not just buildings, but what is around them. Through the process of biophilic design and ideas of biophilic design. And as part of that, they created a challenge that our campus chose to participate in 2017. We were actually the first college campus to take on the Living Community Challenge and to fold that into our planning and processes for campus development. Next slide. So our campus our university was established with the closing of the Fort Ord military base that was here. In 1994, we transitioned to be a university campus. And so we were one of the largest military bases in the US. And so there's opportunities and there's challenges in transitioning in that kind of land use transition. So some of it's just actual transition of buildings. And one of the opportunities is that we have a lot of open land and open space on our campus. Next slide. So in terms of thinking about our campus, the Living Community Challenge seemed like a great opportunity to consider how we can really enhance nature and nature connection, not only in the spaces that are now part of our campus that are natural or naturalized, but also in the buildings themselves. And we began thinking about this through integration into a research methods course that I am the instructor for. And we had students explore the campus, learn about what the Living Community Challenge is, and make recommendations over time. In the first semester that we did this was also when we were considering whether or not to take on the Living Community Challenge. And so you can see folded into the goals that are on the slide here, two goals that really come from the students' work of thinking about the campus, both from their own perspectives as environmental studies students, but also in interviewing other students from other majors, faculty, and staff. And so two key pieces of this that kind of tie in to, nature as a more of a therapeutic and healing space and for renewal are ways of thinking about the building design and connecting the exterior natural environments through biophilic design into the interior built environments. And then the second, and capitalizing on both the ecology as well as the history of the place, were some of the things that students really wanted to see early on and that have become part of our campus planning initiatives as part of this challenge. And then also supporting beautification through art, as well as connections to nature through healthy soil, native plants, and pollinators, and really emphasizing those pieces of our campus. Next slide. So we have continued to integrate this work into the research methods course every semester. So now I've worked on this over 8 semesters with more than 165 environmental studies students and hundreds of students across campus, with the goal of kind of a continual process of thinking about and evaluating what needs to happen on our campus, what's working well as the campus develops, and areas for continual improvement. Next slide, please. So part of the reason why I want to talk about the class and some of the outcomes from the class is that the process of actually folding this into a class is that it itself provides opportunities for Nature RX through the work that the students do. So the way that I've approached this in the class is to introduce students to the idea of biophilic design. We primarily do that by watching a film that's about an hour long on biophilic design and what that looks like. So they start to really get a visual picture of a variety of ways that this is both important for health and well-being, as well as for promoting mental restoration and learning, as well as connection to the natural environment. And then some of the vocabulary for the built environment about how we can talk about ways that we're seeing this on campus. And then we do a walking tour and kind of scavenger hunt where we have a checklist of biophilic elements, and we walk around the campus and look at sustainability features as well as built environment and natural environment that connect to these concepts. And that in itself, students say they start to develop a real sense of pride in their campus, and they learn about places they didn't know that existed. And so then they start to seek out and kind of building on the last presentation, kind of having their own self-awareness and advocating for themselves, that this is actually something that they can have ownership of and integrate into their personal lives, as well as through the curricular activities that we do. In terms of methods, we usually use photo voice behavior mapping and interviews to gather broader, start with the self through photo voice. What do we see that we like on campus? And then evaluating what others are doing on campus. Next slide. So I just wanted to really briefly share with you some of the ways that students talk about this. And the slides are broad, but I'll, in my mind at least, have linkages to Campus Nature RX ideas. So some of the pictures on this slide, they really like different places for walking, that we have a lot of open space, but they liked areas that were naturalized or nicely landscaped on campus. They talked about not having enough time to kind of go out there and getting away. So they wanted to see more ways that the closer to campus buildings could be enhanced. They also talked a fair amount about liking plants that feel like other places, that are familiar to them. And so one of the students in the middle slide there with the agaves, they like seeing that because it reminds them of family in Mexico. And then the third one is also, a lot of students talked about food and edible plants on campus and ways to enhance that, both as a way to just experience nature, but also to address food insecurity issues that are part of our campus community. Next slide. So I think one of the other things that I want to kind of highlight in the findings from some of the students is that a lot of students, especially non-environmental studies majors, talked about how they don't really spend a lot of time outside, but they do really benefit and realize that they're benefiting from the positive aspects of kind of bringing nature, natural light, views of nature into buildings themselves, and that they actually seek out places on campus that do this well, that they recognize that it helps them to focus, to study, to renew themselves while they're working. And so even for students who don't want to necessarily do hands-on activities or go for walks in nature, they really appreciate the places on campus where this is afforded to them. Next slide. So similarly, they really like spaces that blur kind of the indoors and outdoors. So these were photos that students took where they talked about really blurring the boundaries. The photograph on the full right is one of our newest buildings, and there's this courtyard space. It's a U shape, and they really like that both the windows look out onto this space that has a lot of native plants in it, as well as that there's seating and walking areas around this space. And they like that concept a lot and want to see more of that, because as I said, they don't have time to always go out. And so really folding that into the building environment is important to them. Next slide. And then another significant piece that I think we're really going to be building on for the Campus Nature RX working group is ways that they can be involved in realizing sustainability features that also are biophilic design features on campus. So more attention to things like bioswales, natural seating, and other forms of interaction with the campus that can be hands-on and increasing the sustainability of the campus at the same time. Next slide. And then the last thing I think I just want to highlight is that they also really liked physical representations of history, ecology, and culture. And one of the ways that they wanted to see more of this on campus was through murals. Next slide. I'm going to skip this one. And so just capitalizing on the living lab concept and wanting to see more of that, which I already emphasized in the previous slide. And then there's a question about the green frame. So sure, I can answer that while I'm on this slide, since there's a green frame on some of the pictures. So photo voice is a method, just taking pictures and then having dialogue about them and the changes that you want to see, and having those influence decision makers. And so we do that primarily through both inviting decision makers to our class, as well as sharing reports with them. So we added the green and the red frames to images as a way of adding a layer of communication. So there's some where there are green frames that are indicating things that students like on campus, and then red frames are things that they don't like on campus or that needs improvement. I've been focusing mostly on what they like and want in this presentation, but we have a lot of red slides too, and mostly they look like kind of the older parts of campus that still need more work. Next slide. I think I'm almost out of time, so I just want to wrap up that we are seeing the Living Community Challenge as an opportunity to explore campus planning broadly and how to integrate nature and sustainability into both the built environment and the exterior physical environment. We want to inform design principles that can guide the whole campus planning effort. And then also trying to support emergent projects that emerge from each semester that this happens. So some of those, our students are leading a green roof and living wall independent study, trying to address more systematically food insecurity, and are actually looking at dorm beautification because those are some of our oldest buildings on campus. And so the Campus Nature RX Working Group is a way to actually establish and more across campus to formalize some of the ideas that have come out of the research methods course. I think next slide is my last slide. Yeah, so I see there's some questions and I can't remember the order. So if I'm supposed to answer those now, or
we'll have a panel
at the
question.
end.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right after we have one more presentation, and
okay,
then
perfect.
we'll address those questions. So thank you so much, Victoria. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So our next speaker is going to be Haven Kiers. Yeah.
But I'm very excited to be here on my birthday and to share my presentation about the UC Davis Sheepmowers with you. Next slide. So just a little bit of background about sheep mowing. Basically what this is that I got excited a while ago when I found out that they were using sheep to mow some of the lawns underneath the Eiffel Tower in Paris. And I thought that that was about the coolest thing I had ever heard in my life. And then when I realized that UC Davis is an ag school and that we have our own sheep barn, I made it, my research agenda to get these sheep mowing our own lawns. So this is not without precedent. Sheep have been used to mow lawns as early as the 1850s when Frederick Law Olmsted, father of landscape architecture, designed Central Park. He extended it when he designed Prospect Park, and then also during the White House years in World War I, they were used as a way to show when the men were away at war that the sheep could do the job. And just a good quote from Olmsted that I really like, because it talks about the role of labor in art, which I think is really important, and the importance of maintenance and of highlighting it, not as something that you just forget about. Put in your garden and walk away, but really like, how do you keep nature going? So really thinking about, this idea of so long as considerations of utility are neglected or overridden by considerations of ornament, there will not be true art. Next slide. So my research in general focuses on the idea on multifunctional landscapes, right? So I try and answer the question, how can science, design, and practice converge to inform the creation of accessible, multifunctional green spaces that maximize cultural and environmental values? And then, because I love coming up with little, fun mnemonics and things like that, I came up with this concept of nature heals, where HEALS stands for health, engagement, aesthetics, labor, and sustainability. So really, how do we take all of these different pieces that make a landscape and not just focus on one or another, but really how do we create those together? And then that led into, next slide, what if sustainability was instead sheep? And so I got really excited about this concept. And how can we bring sheep into the landscape and all of the amazing multifunctional things that sheep can bring in terms of, their operational benefits in mowing lawns, their educational and engaging in aspects, so cultural, but also environmental. Next slide. A lot of you know that I did work with Stacey at the Arboretum for a number of years, and we were an awesome team. And this concept of mowing lawns using sheep was one that I embraced for a while before I became a professor. And when I was at the Arboretum and said, oh, I really want to do this, people tapped me on the head and said, oh, that's so sweet. But then I became a fancy professor, and suddenly this was part of my research agenda. And so I was able to kind of push this forward. And then next slide, we have slowly been working our way on campus. So you can see our first year in spring of 2021, we were able to mow a small plot of land kind of on the outskirts, the very edge of campus. Technically still considered campus and, adjacent to the Arboretum. So that was good, but you really had to kind of go out of your way to find us. Next slide. Then last spring, we were in a much more central area. I had sort of proof of concept. And so we were able to move to a more central area and in front of the chemistry building and the physics building. And that caused a lot of excitement and stir. And then finally, my goal has been to get up to the quad where you see those double lawns up at the front. I've been told in no uncertain terms that will never happen. That there's too much sheep poop involved. But I'm working on it. So next slide, we are getting closer. So we just had a sheep showcase last Friday. We primarily have the sheep graze during the spring. In the fall, it's actually like lambing season and it makes it crazy, but we didn't want people to forget about the sheep and our program. So we had them out last Friday. Next slide. So basically to give a sense of operational goals, just overview of the project, we bring out 25 sheep at a time for 3 days at a time. So essentially the sheep come out between 9 and 3 p.m. every day on like a Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And they go home every night because there's all sorts of logistical issues. But we have a fenced off area, and we have snow fencing, and then we have another electric fence in there so that people really aren't around. And then the sheep are there. And so we're doing research on a number of different things, right? On the one hand, we're looking at operational goals, right? And so how well do the sheep manage weeds, maintain standard grass length? So we're actually like measuring those things. We're experimenting with low tech budget care, budget lawn care options. We're looking to see whether the sheep are fertilizing some of the soil. And is this a way to reduce traditional maintenance operations on campus? Next slide. And then we go into the ecological goals, where I get to put on my scientist cap. And, really, like as I said, talk about like soil nutrition, right? Are we adding better things? Are we creating healthier soil? And so we're taking measurements before the sheep and after the sheep. Are we improving like ecological biodiversity? Like, is the sheep poop actually bringing in beneficial insects? Are they helping to remove some of the invasive weeds? Like, we've seen them, eat other things sort of preferentially, things that we don't like to, we want to weed, but we don't enjoy doing it. So if we can have sheep doing it, that's better. And then can we also reduce levels of soil compaction, right? Because the sheep aren't as heavy as the lawnmowers. Next slide. But what I'm really interested in, and the part that I want to talk a little bit more about, are these social cultural goals, right? This is kind of the Nature RX aspect of it, right? does having sheep on campus, on a college, land-grant university, actually help enhance place-based identity, right? Do students feel like they're really like a UC Davis ag when they see the sheep out there? Does it make them feel, is it something that they're proud of? Is it something that they're excited about? Does it then also create these opportunities for education and engagement? And I think it's really fun listening to all of these presentations and, talk about swag and talk about incentives and, creating succulent pots. We've come up with a whole series of different types of things that we do with the sheep, painting with the sheep, or, doing things like that I'll show you in a second. To try and bring students in, teach them about sort of the benefits of sheep, but to do it in an engaging way so that it doesn't feel like, something didactic that we're just telling them, oh, this is a good for you, this is sustainable, this is something that they maybe happen upon and they get really excited about. And then does this help promote mental health and does it reduce stress? Next slide. So in terms of, identity, like we've really had a great time branding the UC Davis Sheepmowers. We have, we have our logo that a student created, and I have to I've had the most amazing students work with me. And it's not just because I'm in an office right now and one of the students is right next to me and hearing this, but I've had amazing students work with me. And we've created sort of this identity of the UC Davis Sheepmowers. And we have an Instagram account that's there at the bottom at UC Davis_Sheepmowers, where we've gone up to about 3,200 followers. We've got a website, and really sort of created this idea. The photo on the right, so we've tied bandanas on them. The photo on the right is actually showing them they were invited to an outdoor gala that the College of Ag was throwing. So they got invited to come and participate in a gala. So we're really trying to integrate them into the community. Next slide. And then these are just some of the community events and some of the ways that we're bringing people in. I think by far our most popular event has been felting with the sheep, where we're using, wool felt and giving people little, balls of felt and needles, and then they can create their own sheep ornaments that they can hang or bring with them, and people love that. And then you can see one of the chair shares in the background. We've been lucky to be able to use those on the days that we have the sheep mower events. So we've got the chair shares and we've got umbrellas, and we try and make it like a really just sort of peaceful, but also have an activity for people. We've done planting with the sheep, where we invited people to come and buy native plants from, this is like a taco truck, but it sells native plants. And we were actually giving out, what did we call it? Waste wool. And so it was basically wool from the sheep's bottom and stomach that we're using as fertilizer, so people could add it to their plants. And then we've been promoting grad photos with the sheep. So, again, sort of part of this place identity, you can come out and get your photos taken with the sheep. Next slide. We just did with the faculty and staff Nature RX, we made mobiles, get it? Because it's the sheep mowers. So we had make your own mobiles. We've done watercolors with the sheep. And so we provide watercolors and paper and, the muse is the sheep. And then sheep is motivational speakers, where I'm still learning how to do this, but we did use, basically stencils, and we stenciled fun sort of motivational things during finals week that said, get your sheep together, work your grass off, wool the world. We love our puns within the sheep mowers. And next slide. So essentially, this all went along with a mental health survey. And this is where we basically created a survey, and we asked people at the sheep mowers event about, loneliness and happiness and well-being, and whether the sheep made a difference. And so essentially what we found is that when we asked people when the sheep were around, they definitely agreed, they felt a lot less lonely, it contributed to their well-being, all of this good stuff specific to the sheep mowers. When we just did a comparison survey to when the sheep were around and then in the same place when the sheep were not around, we found that, stress levels were approximately the same, but what we're looking at is the idea of this momentary sort of sense of relaxation, right? That it's not like long-term affecting happiness, but in the moment, it's really contributing and sort of creating this sense of stress or stress reduction and relaxation. And then we've gotten tons of testimonials to sort of support that. Next slide. And then this is my new favorite thing. So I discovered this app that's like the things that you see at IKEA, where you get to press the smiley face to talk about customer service instead of like saying anything. And so we essentially just went up to people at the Sheepmowers events with a smartphone and said, how are you feeling right now? And they pressed the smiley face of how they felt. And then we had students go to the same place at the same time when the sheep weren't around and ask the same question. And what I think is so interesting is that if you look at just like the straight up happy face, it's really about the same. And so, you know, great, everyone's got that same base level of happiness. But then when you look at when the sheep are present, that extra happy is so much more elevated than when you look at it with the non-sheep. And you can see with the non-sheep that you've got more non-smiley faces. So again, it's supporting this idea that in the moment, it is, you know, this wonderful sort of happiness, like you feel really great about it. Next slide. So that's really all I have to say about the sheep, but it's been a really fun program. And I definitely say follow us on Instagram if you're at all interested in watching. We have lots of puns and we do lots of videos, and we're going to be out all spring. So essentially we come out and mow the lawns in the same place once every 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and it's 3 days at a time. So it's like a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then 3 weeks, and then they come back. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
We have a couple questions. Well, first of all, what an awesome project. Such ingenuity going on in this group of folks. I'm super excited to follow up about it. We have a couple questions about what is the app? We have someone mention their happy or not machines that can upload info on how people vote. But Haven, if you have a different app that you've been using and you want to pop in and mention that.
It's just called Survey App. And it's got 2 little smiley faces on it. Yeah. But you can download it. You can download it on, you know, in the App Store, and you can find it online. But it's a pretty generic name, but Survey App.
Survey App, easy enough. Then we've got a question for you, Haven. For campuses who don't have their own sheep population, would it make sense to bring sheep in from elsewhere?
So I think so. I mean, I'm actually right now talking with the Davis High School about bringing the sheep over there, because one of the counselors thinks that it would be such a great thing for her students. And so she's really excited, like, can we bring the sheep mowers over? And once, you know, there are a lot of hoops to jump through. So we're actually like to use the campus sheep. So we're actually going to borrow someone's sheep for the day for at least this pilot project to try it at the high school to see how it works. But I think it's this, and it's basically we're partnering with the counseling department at the high school and the 4F department. And so the student it's a former student who's going to bring her herd of sheep that she has. She's going to be off from college for a second, you know, right before Christmas break, and then she's going to bring her sheep. So I say definitely bring in sheep from other places. And more we're actually seeing people like rent out their herds for the lawn maintenance portion of things. And so what I want to do is expand that so that it's not just, you know, they're not just bringing it to people's lawns, but they're also bringing it places for the health and wellness benefits.
Awesome. And what do you think about sheep versus goats for weed control?
Okay, so this is really good. So sheep are sheep are browsers, goats are grazers. I never remember which one means what, but what it means is that goats pull up from the roots and they will eat anything. And so they're really good for fire control. They're really good for just like putting in an area where you want everything removed. Sheep are a lot pickier. And so that's why we're using them on like lawnscapes, because they do really well with just like, they are not going to like climb up trees. They're not going to eat wires on solar panels. They're not going to do that sort of thing. They just kind of munch. And then this is my fun fact. sheep do not have upper teeth. There are no upper teeth there. So they can't yank and bite things out. They're just using those bottom teeth to pull things so that it's much less of an aggressive kind of thing than a goat.
Haven, I have a question. How much of a factor is poop, and is anybody cleaning up the poop after a sheep grazing day?
So we're not cleaning it up. We are leaving it and we are promoting it as fertilizer. And so what we did between sort of grazing events last year was we had signs up. So we left our snow fencing up, but opened it so that people could go and sit on the grass. But we had a little sign that said, beware of poop. This is going to biodegrade and it's bringing in all sorts of good things, but just be on the lookout. So that's how we got around with it. For this high school event, I have signed up to show up with a pooper scooper afterwards. So, sometimes you just have to sacrifice a little.
Thank you, Haven. Does anybody have any more questions for any of our three lovely panelists?
Well, if there are no more questions, I just want to give 1,000 thank yous to Stacey Parker and Haven Kiers for all of their work on organizing a fabulous symposium today.
That is so nice, Dawn. And I also want to thank all of our presenters too. It's really been it wouldn't have been a symposium without their fabulous presentations. And Jordan, please interrupt me if any more questions do come in. But I will say that I want to plug the newsletter. We are always looking for ideas. We want to feature the work that you all are doing. And sometimes I would just say, please don't underestimate the impact of what you're doing. Even if it's a tiny program, that could be like just what somebody needs as inspiration for getting started at theirs. So please always think about sharing some of your program ideas with us. We typically, when sending out the newsletter, there's a link to a form that you fill out with the information that you want, that like whatever program or project that you want to share, and then some of us who work on the newsletter will reach out to you. But I just wanted to say we really want to hear from you, because all of this incredible work that we've been learning about today, it's really fabulous, and it's nice to actually have this newsletter that's like every month learning about like little tidbits here and there. I also want to thank all the other people that helped Haven and I pull this off today. Once again, I just really want to reiterate that Dawn and Dorothy and others had already charted this path for us and made it really quite easy, like down to like 6 weeks before do this, like everything that we needed to do. So thank you so much again to them for even putting this network together. I also want to thank my student Mega, and we also have a visiting scholar from Brazil named Daniela, who's been helping in this effort and is really interested in Nature RX and bringing it back to her university when she goes back. And then, of course, Jordan, thank you so much for your help in monitoring the chat and posing the questions during all of the question and answer sessions. And Haven for being my co-conspirator, even though she's a big fancy professor now. I'm just really fortunate for these collaborations, and she's one of my favorite people to work with, and I couldn't have put this on without her. So thank you all so much. Do we have any last questions that have come in?
We do. We've got a question about the newsletter, which it looks like Dorothy put a link to the Campus Nature if you guys didn't see that, so you can join the newsletter or network. And then we've got a question that asks, Where and when will the PowerPoint presentations be posted for us to review?
That's such a good question. I'm like literally taking this like one little day at a time, and I'm like, okay, so
Soon. We will make it a priority.
yeah, so I think it'll take longer for the recordings. The slides will be posted on the website. The recordings, I think that there's a way to like treat them so that they probably need to be closed captioned. I'm sorry that we didn't have closed captioning today. And Catherine Thresher Carroll actually pointed that out in the chat, and I was like trying to Google on the side how to do that. But we will make sure that that happens for the reposting on YouTube. Also, I think that there's something that you can do to sort of like segment it up so that you can get more easily navigate to like each presentation. So I don't know how long that will take and who will do that. I'm hoping to find somebody who can help me to do that. But the slides, I think we can probably get posted pretty quickly, probably within the next week or two, I would say. So.
And I'll just add real quickly that if you join the newsletter, we will definitely put out an announcement when the slides are available on the website, and also when the videos are ready. And Stacey, I can give you some advice on the videos too.
Oh, very good. See, I'm telling you, Dorothy has been like everything in this process. Thank you. Okay, Jordan, did we have any more questions? No. Wow. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. I would just like to see everybody together. If you want to turn on, I mean, you don't have to, but it's kind of nice. Like, this is our network. This is our Campus Nature RX network. And I'm sure so many of you are doing such fabulous, fabulous work. And oh, it's so beautiful to see your faces. Thank you so, so very much. This is, yes, someone take a screenshot. Not me, because I'm not going to be able to figure that out very well. But somebody please take a screenshot and then send it to us. Thank you all so much for a fabulous symposium. I do hope that we get to do this in person at some point. Maybe we can do like a little hybrid, because I know that this format actually enables so many of us to actually be here. But I just really want to thank you all for all of the work that you do. I feel like, it's been a privilege for me to be a part of this community and to do this work and to take inspiration from so many of you. Really, had it not started with Dawn, I wouldn't have started a program here at UC Davis, and so many of you have just contributed all to making that program better and better year after year. So thank you all so much. Did anybody get a screenshot? Oh, we've got another person to admit. Anybody get that screenshot? Nice. Yay.
I got one.
Yay. Thank you. Okay, well, does anybody have any final words, questions, anything? We have 4 more minutes.
I think we're good to go.
Haven and Stacey.
Okay.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Here. See you next year.
Thank you.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.